Who was the statement on the International Tea Day? Any other statement will be read tomorrow because they must be scheduled. Okay. Who has the statement on International Tea Day? Is it Senator Chalgei? Senator Kisang, can you read your statement very fast? Yeah, where is your statement? Okay, proceed, Senator Chute.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. This is a request for a statement on payment made by the Marsabit County government to various suppliers for the financial year 2021, 2022, 2023. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget regarding payments made by Marsabit County government to various suppliers for the financial year 2021, 22, 23. In the statement, the committee should establish 1. The ownership of registration status of the following companies: Dream Zone Company Limited, Buku Holdings Limited, Kobe Constructions and Water Services Limited, Sowell Trading Company Limited, Almiran Investment Limited, North Face Investment, Bismil Limited, Knoxville Ventures Limited, Culture Taxi Services, Al Halim Kenya Limited, Nexus Development Limited, Bismal Enterprise, Kachacha Company Limited, Tulasagalan Limited, Blue Tick Solution Limited, and Kesa Sumu Tech Limited companies, which have been providing services to Marsabit County government. Honorable Speaker, 2, state when Marsabit County government started contractual engagements with the aforementioned companies, outlining the nature of services each company has rendered to the county, further verifying payments of approximately 1,013,480,731.95 made to these companies during the financial year 2022-2023. Number 3, identify the bank accounts held by the Marsabit County government in KCB Bank and Equity Bank Limited, and furnish bank statements for the financial years 2021, 2022 to 2022, 2023 for the county government operations. 4, cause the Financial Reporting Center, FRC, the Asset Recovery Agency, AAR, and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Authority to investigate any suspicious financial transactions conducted by Marsabit County government pertaining to payments for goods and services, and hold to account persons responsible for misappropriating or pilferage of county funds. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Next order. Okay, so by revoking standing order 45.2, we defer order number 8. We have no numbers for the division. Then we go to order number 9. Clerk, call order number 9. Oh, you have to call. He has now the statement. Okay, fine. Can you make the statement, Chalgay? And today you are not well organized.
No, I've been on the top of the mountain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your intelligence. Statement on an issue of general topical concern called International Tea Day. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 52.1 to make a statement on issue of general topical concern, namely celebration of International Tea Day. In 2005, Mr. Speaker, tea-producing countries, including Sri Lanka, Nepal, Kenya, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Uganda, came together to celebrate International Tea Day. Later in 2019, Mr. Speaker, the Intergovernmental Group on Tea decided to celebrate International Tea Day every day on May 21st. The United Nations accepted this celebration, and the first UN International Tea Day was celebrated on 21st May 2020. Mr. Speaker, sir, today, being 21st May 2024, we join the rest of the world in celebrating International Tea Day. We encourage Kenyans not only to produce tea, but also to be consumers of it. Besides its taste, tea has several health benefits, such as reducing the risk of heart attack and stroke, aiding in weight loss, protecting bones, preventing tooth decay and loss, boosting the immune system, soothing the digestive system, helping to battle cancer, and helping to relax the body. Mr. Speaker, sir, according to the latest data from the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, more than 7 million tons of tea are produced worldwide. Kenya is the third leading producer and the biggest exporter, and accounting for about 28% of the world's tea export. Mr. Speaker, sir, small-scale tea farming in Kenya accounts for about 65% of the total tea production in the country, with the rest being produced by multinationals. Over the years, the tea sector in Kenya has continued to be a major foreign exchange earner for over our country and has become a catalyst for the growth of rural area economies since post-independence. With the right political goodwill, and allow me, Mr. Speaker, from His Excellency the President and the Deputy President, and from the Kenya Kwanza government, which is fronting tea sectoral reforms, and we had a tea engagement and reform sector at Kericho last year that have started to take root. Smallholder farmers will see higher market dividends from this season. So, Speaker, sir, as we entrench these tea reforms, mostly targeting small-scale tea farmers and the local farmer, we recognize that the sector is one of the key drivers of Kenya's socio-economic development. It is a key pillar in economic growth and provides a direct source of livelihood to over 750,000 farmers and employs millions of people. Like, for example, in Nandi, out of 6 sub-counties, 4 grow tea, even including your county, Mr. Speaker. Some of the reforms already in place include the introduction of minimum market price under guarantee minimum reforms, the fertilizer subsidy initiative to farmers, an increase in monthly payments to farmers, timely payment of bonuses, and reduction of interest rate to farmers by financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, sir, in conclusion, with the increase in rainfall this year, we expect that the tea production, and it is worth to note, Mr. Speaker, that some of the tea factories are no longer picking tea, for example, in Bomet and many other counties, because the tea production is too much because of heavy rainfall and subsidized fertilizer. by the government. Therefore, we call on the relevant authorities to ensure steady market and price stability for our tea farmers. We want also to call to Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, to assure our tea farmers that we will support and assist in legislating, and you are aware there is a Tea Amendment Act in the floor of the House, on necessary reforms, Mr. Speaker, and ensure maximum production and better returns, Mr. Speaker. It is also a call to Kenyans, especially who take other hard drinks, to reduce the hard drinks like alcohol and consume more tea to ensure we improve on local consumption and protect our farmers. So, Mr. Speaker, I know there are a number of us who take other type of drinks, but I want to call upon Kenyans, let us drink tea in the morning, in the evening, Mr. Speaker, so
some
that
of the
it becomes...
issues you are now raising are not in your statement.
No, Mr. Speaker, you know today is Tea International Day.
So
I request...
in the statement as approved.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, just in 30 seconds, since today is Tea International Day, people who take other drinks can today take tea, and we'll make progress as a country. I thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker.
I want to give 2-3 senators to make a comment on this International Tea Day, especially the senator from Bomet County, Senator Sigei Wakiri.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. And as we prepare to celebrate the International Day tomorrow in Nandi County, Mr. Speaker, we take pride as tea growing zones. Why? Because tea, Mr. Speaker, is one of the major foreign earner for this country. Where I come from, I do grow tea in 4 out of 5 sub-counties, and 90% of all cash crop, if I may call them, is actually from tea. And therefore, I support the statement by the Honorable Senator Cherargei, who is actually the host of this conference tomorrow. And I believe that this will go a long way in enhancing the reforms which have been running for a couple of years now. This began in the first attempt by the majority leader of this House when he set up the Tea Amendment Act 2020, which unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, got into challenges where people went to court to challenge various sections of that particular act. But fortunate enough, following the efforts which were picked up by the current administration, where it had identified agriculture as one of its 5 major items in its delivery to the people of Kenya, agriculture was picked up, and tea in its own way was a specific crop that has been given a lot of attention. And Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, I am also spearheading additional amendments to the 2020 Act. As we speak right now, all the parties that had filed various cases in court have agreed to a compromise. We have withdrawn all those cases, and we have reached a position where very many of the issues which had been raised towards the reforms in the tea sector have been resolved. I believe that the outcome of this conference tomorrow will highlight the very specific aspects that the tea sector in Kenya will be improved in order to make sure that we enhance not only the foreign earnings from tea, but also direct benefits to the farmers. I would encourage members who come from tea growing zones to participate in this conference and contribute towards ensuring that our farmers not only get support from the government, but also to have that personal commitment to ensure the sector is improved and supported. I thank you, and once again, I want to encourage Senator Cherargei to make sure that he fully engages the farmers so that it is not going to be a white-collar engagement, but a farmer-based kind of an engagement from the ground. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just in 2 minutes, you can be able to make that comment, Clerk. Kindly 2 minutes. Mombasa County is the highest beneficiary of tea that are produced in other counties. So, Senator Mohamed Faki,
Asante
what do
Mheshimiwa
you have to
Spika.
say on tea?
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii kuchangia taarifa ya kusherehekea siku ya chai iliyoletwa bungeni na Senator Cherargei. Mheshimiwa Spika, Mombasa ndio soko kubwa kabisa ulimwenguni la chai. Na ni faraja kubwa kwa watu wa Mombasa kwamba kwa miaka sasa wameweza kuwa ndio wenyeji wa soko la chai ulimwenguni. Mheshimiwa Spika, sio chai ya Kenya peke yake ambayo inauzwa katika soko la Mombasa. Kuna chai ya kutoka Burundi, kuna chai ya kutoka Rwanda, kuna chai ya kutoka Tanzania, kuna chai ya kutoka sehemu nyingi ambao Mheshimiwa Spika hutumika. Chai zile hutumika kufanya mchanganyiko na chai ya Kenya, ndio ikawa chai ya Kenya imekuwa bora zaidi na pia kuboresha zile chai nyingine ambazo zinauzwa ulimwenguni. Mheshimiwa Spika, jambo la kusikitisha ni kwamba hivi karibuni kumekuwa na hujuma ya soko lile la chai katika kaunti ya Mombasa. Na hujuma hizi Mheshimiwa Spika zimechangia mataifa mengine kuweza kufungua masoko yao ya chai. Kwa mfano Tanzania wameweza kufungua mnada wao wa chai hivi sasa, na chai yao haiji tena Kenya kwa sababu ya masuala kama haya ambayo nayazungumzia. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, tunapoangalia kusaidia kuinua chai, lazima tuangalie pande zote mbili. Chai bila ya soko Mheshimiwa Spika haitaweza kumsaidia mkulima. Lazima chai ile ipate soko ambalo ni la kisawasawa, ambalo litaweza kumsaidia mkulima na yule ambaye anauza chai ile. Mheshimiwa Spika, hapa katikati kuna shirika la KTDA. Mheshimiwa Spika, juzi tulikuwa na mkutano na katika kamati ya leba ambapo kampuni moja ama shirika moja la chai ambalo linaajiri wafanyakazi Mheshimiwa Spika limekataa kulipa mfanyakazi kwa muda wa miaka 3 sasa Mheshimiwa Spika. Na walipoitwa watu wa KTDA walikuwa wanasema kwamba mfanyakazi huo si mfanyakazi wetu. Tayari kampuni ile factory ya chai ambayo inahudumu kule wamesema huyu ni mtu wetu. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, katikati hapa mashirika kama KTDA Mheshimiwa Spika ndio mara nyingi yanaweza kuhujumu zile juhudi za mkulima. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, pale katika soko la chai la Mombasa, wengi Mheshimiwa Spika pale wanatumia wakati wao kufanya utafiti wa kuweza kuona kwamba chai ile ambayo inakuja inaboreshwa. Kwa mfano Mheshimiwa Spika, hata hapa bungeni wiki iliyokwisha niliweza kuonyesha baadhi ya maseneta watumie chai ya hibiscus, ambayo hiyo pia ni moja katika zile chai ambazo zimebuniwa. Kwa hivyo siku hizi sio chai peke yake, lakini chai imeweza kulelewa kiasi ambacho utapata ladha tofauti tofauti za chai ambazo zinauzwa, na hii inachangia pakubwa kuipa Kenya fedha za kigeni. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, tunaposherehekea chai hii Mheshimiwa Spika, ni kwamba lazima pia tutambue mchango unaofanywa na shirika la East African Tea Traders kule Mombasa pamoja na soko la chai ya Mombasa, kwa sababu pale ndio wale ambao wanauza chai, wananunua chai, wanakutana na wale wanauza chai ili kuhakikisha kwamba soko la chai Mheshimiwa Spika linaendelea kupanuka. Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii.
Hapa namuona Deputy Speaker Emeritus Professor Mangri Kamal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words in the celebration of tea. Tea, Mr. Speaker, has not only been the money maker for this country, but it's been a beverage that every Kenyan loves. We know we have our own way of making tea, and even when you are out of this country, people talk of the Kenyan tea and the way Kenyans mix their tea. And so this is something that is worth celebrating. And even as we celebrate, Mr. Speaker, we know that there are areas in this country where there are no cash crops, and we want to encourage that cash crops can spread. And tea is one of those which grows in most corners of this country. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I was in Embu the other day, and I have shared this with Senator Mundik, that I went and discovered something I didn't know. A plant that looks like tea, but is called mogoga. Mr. Speaker, my discovery of mogoga was very interesting because as we were driving, we met a lot of vehicles that were running in supersonic speed. And I said, what is it that these people are rushing? Then they said it's something called mogoga. So I asked to be taken to a farm to see this plant. When I saw the plant, it looked like a very healthy tea crop. And I'm saying this.
Senator Tabitha Mutinda, what do you think you can inform a professor who has a lot of knowledge?
I don't love
because she must accept first that she needs your information.
Thank you. I'm also following the roots of becoming one. But you know, from where we come from, me and you, from the great county of Meru, it's also good that Professor notes that we also have tea in Meru County. So not only she saw Mogoka, but we also have tea.
No, she saw Mogoka in Embu, not in Meru. She mentioned in Embu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank her for that information because I don't know why she read my mind. That I wanted a replacement of Mogoka with tea. Not only in Embu, but also in Meru. Because when I saw this plant in the farm that I went to, it was a very healthy bush. I told them this is tea. They said, no, it's not tea. But I asked the lady, the owner of the small acre that she had. She said the only problem is that my son has also become an addict to this one. So I said, what is it? He said, yes, we have been planting it, but he has become an addict and is causing problems. Tea does not cause any problems. Mr. Speaker, it is the best drink. So I want to encourage that where we can plant it, if we can replace these other plants that seem to be addictive to our youth and seem to be messing our youth, let's spread out. And in fact, when I came, I reported the same to my colleague senator from Embu, and I said, there's a plant that looks like tea. Why don't we go for tea? And I really would like to encourage him that as we celebrate this, he actually goes down to the ground and encourages people, because where that plant grows, I think we can have the best variety of tea, the best, because that plant is so healthy, except for that idea that it's very addictive, and our youth seems to be derailed because of that. Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I can see my colleague wants to respond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Professor Kamal, you know, now you have mentioned Mundigi 5 times. And he must didn't get 2 minutes to say something.
Asante Bwana Spika, naunga mkono siku ya kesho ya kulima wa majani, na katika Embu County tuko na 4 sub county, Manyata na Runyenje huwa napanda majani. Na mambo ya ajabu, miaka mingi wamekuwa wakipanda, na hiyo wakati tulisaliwa tulikuta watoto wakifunzwa na hiyo pesa ya manjani, lakini wakati huu ni aibu kubwa sana, kwa sababu unakuta kilimo ya manjani inaendelea kusoroteka na unakuta ile bei inaendelea kuwa chini. Lakini naunga mkono siku ya kesho, wakiendelea pia wataongea vile kilimo ya manjani itaweza kushukuru njia ile inafaa, ndio bei iweze kusaidia wakulima wa manjani. Kama kuna mtu anaumia ni mtu wa kilimo ya manjani, kwa sababu anaamuka saa 11 wakati mvua inanyesha, na pia ni watoto, ni watu wazima, na pia wazee na akina mama. Na wakati ule mwingine wakienda kuuza, unakuta mpaka hiyo kila siku mpaka hiyo vitu iweze kutolewa na iende iuzwe, na unakuta kuanga hasira nyingi sana. Kwa hiyo naunga hiyo mkono, na pia bei iweze kuangaliwa. Na pia ukienda parapara ile magari inapitia, inakuwa na shinda mambo ya CDF na pia ya county na national government, hiyo maparapara inafaa iangaliwe. Pia Bwana Speaker, nataka nikosoe Senator Kamal Professor kwa kutanja mambo ya Mogoka ama miraa katika Mount Kenya East, Embu, Meru, Tharaka Nithi. Hiyo ni kilimo yetu. Unakuta wakati wa zamani watu wa chini ilikuwa ni maskini, lakini leo tunataka iwe value addition, tuweze kutengeneza kama ni juice na chewing gum na zile vitu zingine. Kwa hivyo ningeomba senator, wakati tutalete hiyo mbilo hapa, ningeomba vile nimekuwa nikisaidia nyinyi na kusupport mbilo zenu, hiyo mbilo ambaye wakati itakunja, ningeomba munisaidie iwe maseneta 27 ama 30. Kwa hiyo Bwana Speaker, nataka nikosoe Professor Kamal, hiyo ni vitu ambaye ilikuwako hata wakati wa zamani. Kwa hivyo Bwana Speaker, naunga mkono ndio tuweze kusaidika. Asante. Ni mimi Deputy Party Leader Alexander Munyimondigi.
Senator Faki, hoja ya nidhamu ni juu ya nini?
Ni juu ya, ningetaka kuuliza kama ni haki kwa Seneta Mundigi kusimama ndani ya bunge hili kutia sherehe kwa mmea ambao kulingana na Narcotics Act ni dawa ya kulevya, inahusiana na dawa ya kulevya, Mheshimiwa Spika. Na hata hapa bungeni Mheshimiwa,
what is your point of order?
Anapotosha taifa kwamba ni mmea ambao unafaa watu, Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa sababu mihadharati ni jambo ambalo limepigwa marufuku na Narcotics Act. Kwa Mheshimiwa Spika, hii mugoka
Senator Faki, ningependa kukujulisha ya kwamba hiyo mmea onda Senator Mundigi. Have you said?
Thank you, Mheshimiwa Spika.
Nilikuwa na kueleza ya kwamba huo mmea unatoka Mbere huko Embu County. Ni mmea ambao umehalalishwa na serikali ya Kenya katika Crop Act 2013 ulihalalishwa. Kwa hivyo labda ulete sheria ingine ya kuitoa kama kilimo, kama mmea maalum wa taifa la Kenya, basi ndio utakuwa kweli. No. Both of you out of order. Please. You executed your point of order, Senator Mohamed Faki.
Seeking to amend the Narcotics Act so that it removes caffeine and cathinol as narcotic drugs in our legislation.
So, sababu unajua we nimekuwa na wewe weekend mzima, na kwa hivyo sipendi kuhujumu ama iwe ya kwamba sikupi ruhusa kuongea, lakini naomba tafadhali tupige hatua kwa sasa. Atandi is about tea, not Mogoka, not Pyrethrum, not coffee. It is tea, International Tea Day. So whoever is Senator Tabitha? Yes. On tea? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity. And I also want to join the world as they celebrate the Tea Day tomorrow. I know Nakuru County people are farmers of tea, and I think as one of the senators have said, I think it's to ensure the farmers are taken care of so that they can all benefit. Because if you look at the tea internationally, it's one of the crop that is regarded very highly. But when you see the people who plant that tea and pluck the tea, they don't match to the standard that is given globally. And for me, the tea, I don't imagine how the world would be without tea, because that is the cup that you wake up in the morning to wake you up so that you are able to take your day. Then from there, I want to ensure, the people to know that tea is medicine, and we should all celebrate tea and have many cups as possible, but not replace with the wine that we want for our food, the beer that we want for, like the way Cherangei is trying to say. The thirst of the beer, the thirst of our wine, when we take our meals, it is different from the tea. So don't mix the issues. Just market your tea and ensure the tea, people understand it's medicine, and they can take as many cups as possible before the evening or before the end of the day. You can have more than 10 cups of tea. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Senator Sifuna.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm aware that the entire government is in the US. So I was looking across the aisle and seeing some of the most vociferous defenders of this government. I thought they would be on this trip, but they are here celebrating International Tea Day with us. This should be a clear lesson that shouting horse from the other side will not endear you to the presidency, Mr. Speaker. Number two, I'm a bit confused, Mr. Speaker, on this International Tea Day. Should it
Your
be...
point of order, Senator Chalgay.
Mr. Speaker, you cannot allow Senator Sifuna to be cantankerous. Mr. Speaker, under Section 105, Parliament and Senate Mwaso is an independent arm of government. The trip, Mr. Speaker, is undertaken by the National Executive. Is it in order to try and cast aspersions by indicating that any trip that is taken outside Parliament or outside by the Executive should be taken with parliamentarians, yet we have our own budget and we are independent arm of government? Is he making it in good faith, Mr. Speaker? Or is jealousy that he was left out of the trip? Can he be clear?
Senate.
Honorable Speaker, I want members of this House to reflect on their own standing. When you are only invited to trips to the goat auction in Mogosho, but others are taken to the US, you should reflect on your standing within your own party. Mr. Speaker, the second point I wanted clarity on is whether in celebrating this International Tea Day, we are celebrating the growers or the drinkers. Because if it is the drinkers of tea, that debate should be properly anchored by Senator Osotsi from Vihiga and myself as the leading Luhya leaders in this House, who are known to be the highest consumers of this product. I don't know what Cherargei knows about tea more than Senator Osotsi, because Osotsi both grows the tea and drinks tea heavily, Honorable Speaker. So my concern really is that clarity. Maybe the maker of that statement can tell us, are we celebrating the drinkers or the growers? Thirdly, Honorable Speaker, I was a bit surprised hearing the head of state speak the other day, and he said that he is not aware of any Kenyan tea brand. I have grown up drinking Ketepa, knowing this is Kenyan tea. I would like some clarity on these matters from the maker of this statement, Honorable Speaker. Does Kenya have a Kenyan brand of tea? What is this I've been drinking? Is Ketepa from Sri Lanka? Honorable Speaker, finally, I want to encourage the leadership of the areas, Nandi and even Bomet, where this tea is grown, to also reflect on the resolution of the disputes that we have seen, especially regarding foreign companies that have been holding land in those areas and have been growing tea all these years. At the beginning of this term of Parliament, there were very serious incidents in Bomet and in Nandi, where even people lost their lives and machinery was destroyed, property of immense value was destroyed. Honorable Speaker, we never hear from Cherargei how that matter was resolved. In fact, the protests there were more violent, and we didn't see the sort of police action being taken on people in Nandi and people in Bomet who are burning property and destroying property owned by these companies, Honorable Speaker. So as we celebrate this International Tea Day, please let us reflect on all these matters so that we as a country can protect this very key source of foreign exchange and this industry that employs thousands of Kenyans. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Senator Wamatinga Wahome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also like to make a comment on this statement. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, I come from a tea-growing region, and we produce some of the best quality tea in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, sir, the problem that we've been facing as farmers across board is that we've never taken a firm position on how we can empower our farmers, be it tea, be it coffee, be it avocado, be it macadamia. Indeed, tomorrow, as we reflect on tea consumers and tea growers, we must ask ourselves, what is it that we've done for the tea farmers? Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm happy to report that for the first time, before this House, in the Agricultural Committee, we dealt with the tea bill and improved on it to ensure that we empower the farmers, and we by involving the county government, and more important, Mr. Speaker, sir, creating mechanisms where farmers can seek and access markets directly internationally. But as we do that, Mr. Speaker, it is also important to ask ourselves whether we've been doing enough to ensure that value addition in our produce, be it tea, be it coffee, be it macadamia, be it avocado, whether it does justice to our farmers. Mr. Speaker, sir, with a bit of attention and the diversity of knowledge in this house, we can be able to unleash our farmers by ensuring that the value chain that will unleash the farmers gets down there. As we also do that, it is important also to report that for the first time, we have a government in place that is and has come with a lot of political goodwill to ensure that the farmers of this country do not only get their rightful dues, but they do access and they are represented in the markets, in the boards that have been formed, and their voice is heard. Mr. Speaker, sir, for a long time, farmers have been left in the peripheral. Decisions have been made in Nairobi, they've been implemented down there. But now, with the transformative bottom-up economic approach, now farmers are participatory and in a collaborative manner being engaged so that they become decision makers for the decisions that will influence them. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, sir, we've seen the Kenya Kwanza government strengthen the cooperative movement through its leadership, and that will ensure that farmers are able to live from their collective bargain by ensuring that they pull together their resources so that they can make better bargains and also achieve economies of scale. Finally, Mr. Speaker, sir, we've also seen that the government has endeavored to bring affordable fertilizer, subsidized fertilizer, though there are some people who had tried to abuse the mechanism. It has indeed improved the yield, and that is evidently clear. We can see that from the previous harvests, we have better yield, better quality, and most importantly, the farmers have been able to increase their income. And with that, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support. Thank you.
Senator Buru Oginga.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also used to grow coffee in Nandi, and I still have, I'm a farmer in Nandi, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to comment about this International Tea Day, because, Mr. Speaker, Kenya produces very high quality tea. And internationally, Mr. Speaker, Kenyan tea is used for blending other low quality teas. And so much so, Mr. Speaker, that countries like Great Britain, which do not grow even a single tree of tea, have what is called English tea. And English tea is sold as one of the best teas in the world, Mr. Speaker. And yet Britain does not even have a single tree of tea in their country. Mr. Speaker, this is because of the trade barriers. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to protectionism, internationally, even in the WTOs, it is a very, very big argument that the developed countries where we export our goods, they want us to continue as appendages of supply of raw materials to their industries, thus creating jobs in their own countries. And Mr. Speaker, they want us to be exporting raw tea. That is why I think Honorable Sifuna was asking, where is the Kenyan branded tea? I mean, what is the brand of Kenyan tea internationally? Internationally, we might not have. We only have Ketepa here locally, Mr. Speaker. But when you want to export tea, processed tea, high quality tea of Kenya, they put very high tariff barriers on the teas so that you cannot access their market with those very high tariffs that they put on the tea. So they want you, they come here in Mombasa, tea is auctioned raw, and Mr. Speaker, access their market if you process, if you do value addition. Mr. Speaker, this is the area where we should work on together with all the other countries together so that we can access those markets with the value-added goods, Mr. Speaker, so that our farmers and our people can get better value for our sweat and for our money, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go now to Bungoma County.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa nafasi hii. Mheshimiwa Spika, wengi wametaja na kusifia kunywa ama kubugia chai, aina yoyote ya chai. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, katika kizazi hiki katika serikali ya Kenya Kwanza, japo tunasherehekea siku ya kimataifa ya chai, lazima tuhakikishe kwamba katika vitongoji vya nchi hii wakulima na wanywaji wa chai wanajivunia vinywaji hivi. Mheshimiwa Spika, katika bonde la Ufa katika Mlima Kenya, miundombinu na msingi imewekwa imara kwa linda wakulima wa majani chai na viwanda vya majani chai. Lakini katika mkoa wa Magharibi, Mheshimiwa Spika, mambo ni tofauti. Japo tunasherehekea kimataifa, kimashinani watu wa mkoa wa Magharibi wana maswali ya kuuliza. Katika mkoa wa Magharibi, hususan Mlima Elgon na vitongoji vya Bungoma, tulikubaliana na serikali kwamba ni lazima ama ni sharti kuwe na viwanda ama kiwanda katika mlima ili wakulima wa majani chai katika eneo hilo waweze kufurahia kama wenzio katika sehemu mbalimbali za nchi ya Kenya. Hadi sasa mfumo wa makadirio ya kifedha yamepita, lakini bado tunaishi kwa matumaini. Tunataraji kwamba isiwe hadithi ya matumaini ya mbwa kutamatika pale mlango unapofungwa na mlango wa jikoni, Mheshimiwa Spika. Sasa tunajadili umuhimu ama ubora wa majani chai, lakini hatuwezi kuwa na majani chai ambayo yana hali ya juu iwapo pembejeo ni gushi. Iwapo pembejeo hizi watu hawataki kuwajibika na kuhakikisha kwamba wakulima wa majani chai, wakulima wa pareto, wakulima wa kahawa wanapata mbolea ambayo inastahili na hivi kwamba viwe viwango vya kimataifa. Sasa japo tunafurahi, tuna changamoto kama serikali kuhakikisha kwamba tuendelee kufurahia kwa pamoja kwa jasho la haki. Pasio wakulima wanatoa jasho na wachache wanakula manufaa ya jasho la wakulima katika nchi ya Kenya. Sasa ni jukumu letu sisi wote kama maseneta katika jumba hili tuhakikishe tunawatenda haki wakulima, tunawatenda haki wanywaji wa chai na vile vile washikadau katika sekta nzima ya chai katika nchi ya Kenya. Asante sana Mheshimiwa Spika, na watakia sikukuu ya chai.
We have this order. Daniel Manzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tea is a very important plant in the country, and I want to take a direction. There has been issues, although most of them have been sorted out either by legislation or by management or by government, where tea farmers were not getting a proper deal from their sweat. And Mr. Speaker, my first trip to Meru was with you when we were going to sort out a very urgent matter on tea growers. And we went to your constituency with yourself and quite a number of members of parliament, and the farmers came out strong, Mr. Speaker. And with your leadership, a solution of the tea farmers is to be found within 24 hours. They had threatened to uproot all the trees, and they were now going to plant more profitable plants. Mr. Speaker, we should never find ourselves in that situation for tea farmers in the country, whereby when they sell their tea, Mr. Speaker, there are delays in their payment. Mr. Speaker, when they sell their tea, they should be paid the right value for the tea, Mr. Speaker. I know the tea is marketed in Kenya and all over the world, and for many years I've been in the Committee for Agriculture, and I'm very familiar with what is happening in Mombasa, in the tea markets, and also what is happening abroad in the tea auctions. Mr. Speaker, now our tea, and especially tea from Meru and Mount Kenya generally, is highly sold in Russia through Dubai. So our marketers have happened now to find a new huge market in Russia. And therefore, we should make sure that, Mr. Speaker, at all material times, that the farmers get value for their sweat, and they get value for what they work for, and they get value for their commodity. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Senator Kisang Kipkemoi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, also arise to make comments on the International Tea Day and also to confirm that Elgeyo-Marakwet County, actually we are tea growing county. You know, we are known for other things, but we also grow tea, and we have one factory, and we are in the process of getting a second factory, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, as a country, you know, Kenya, we produce high-quality tea, as our colleague, Senior Oburu has said. But the biggest challenge that we have is we export raw tea. England, UK is using our tea and processing and packaging, and they call it English tea. You go to UK and buy expensive tea, and the beneficiaries are not Kenyans who are growing the tea, Honorable Speaker. That's why it is very important that if there are any barriers that doesn't allow us to export our processed tea, then we do the way the president has done with the Japanese, the Toyota in Japan, Honorable Speaker, where they are coming to Kenya and set up a factory to manufacture spare parts. We also need to, if they don't open up and these barriers, then we make them to come and process the tea here in the country so that we can generate employment opportunities for our youth, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, if you remember early 80s and early 90s, Honorable Speaker, when there was a lot of deforestation, the late President Daniel Arap Moi came up with Nyaya Tea Zones. And the reason for Nyaya Tea Zone was to ensure we conserve our forests. I believe also we need to encourage our communities, because in the process of planting and growing 15 billion trees, Honorable Speaker, we need to partner with Kenya Forest Service so that we can ensure all around our forest, instead of fencing our forest, Honorable Speaker, we plant a few meters of tea, which will generate employment. It will give us foreign exchange and also employ our youth, Honorable Speaker. It's very important. And Honorable Speaker, people have talked about addiction, maybe Mira and Mukuka, Honorable Speaker. I believe even tea, the Keteba tea that we have taken forever, Kenya, we have some very pure tea, Honorable Speaker. Maybe we need to put something that can make our youth get addicted to tea instead of other things. We need to ask Keteba if there is anything that we can put so that, you know, we become addicted to tea and not the other issues, Honorable Speaker. Sifuna, I know you are saying you are highest consumer of tea in Western Kenya. If anything, majority, if you go to Rift Valley, we don't consume the other things you guys consume. We consume tea and milk. Honorable Speaker, tea, just tea and milk. Honorable Speaker, let's encourage also our people that where they have fertile land, where tea can be grown, we should encourage them to start planting maybe an acre, 2, 3 acres, 5 acres of tea, Honorable Speaker, so that we can have more cash crops across the country, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I support this today. We need to celebrate our farmers, Honorable Speaker, because the person to celebrate most should be the farmers and also the consumers. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I support this particular
statement. Last but not the
statement.
least, Senator Abbas Sheikh.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. You know, the tea growers think that only they have the right for tea only, while northern Kenya people are the highest consumers of tea. So I think I want to tell you that you should appreciate that we take a lot of tea, and we are marketing the tea of Kenya. But Honorable Speaker, I think much has been said that the tea in Kenya, the Kenyan tea is actually of high value, and but the unfortunate thing is tea is being monopolized by the multinationals that are growing it. The Kenyan farmers are disadvantaged. They rarely access the market, and most of the tea is now sold in auction. I think this gives a disadvantage to our farmers. One other thing is that tea coming from Kenya, especially which is one of the best tea, is that people like UK, they grow tea also. Pakistan, they grow tea, but they still import from here and repackage it and rename it. Rebrand it again and rename it. That the source of the tea is coming from Pakistan, it's coming from UK, something like the Keteba. Keteba actually tea is tea that is grown in Kericho, by these multinationals. But when you go to those other parts of the world, you'll find that this thing is actually said, this source is coming from UK. And I know the same thing is done by Pakistan and other countries. One other thing is the problem we have actually is middlemen. You know, in most of the crop agricultural products, farmers are not getting the value for their money, but their product. It's at their disadvantage. Actually, most of it, they are brokers. And this guy is called KTDA, actually, has not given good services to our farmers, especially the small-scale farmers. And therefore, we need to review the tea auctions and all these things. One other thing is that in Kenya, instead of selling the raw material, we need to value add the tea. So at least we can be able to get the product, the value for the product and for the farmers. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
There is a member who is on and off, Senator Tabitha. Do you want to comment on this tea day or another matter which is coming in the next order?
No, Mr. Speaker, I've really been waiting to make a comment because you know where I come from.
And off, on and off.
No, I don't know what's happening with my mic. Senator Sifuna, you are out of order.
On behalf of all the Meru, including
yes,
myself.
exactly, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to speak on behalf of the Meru County, where I also come from, because this is one of our cash crops, so that Meru stops being seen that it only deals with the Mogoka and Mira. We are enriched to, we are godly blessed to be able to have different cash crops that have international markets, Mr. Speaker. And that is why I want to encourage many people even to visit, because it's very hard, you know, very hard to find people suffering with any hunger or any challenging issues, because when it comes to job opportunities and cash crops, we lead in these two great cash crops. But all said, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to ask Senator Cheryl Guy why this invite was not extended to this Senate, because some of us would pride in also celebrating, especially with the growers, the concern that Senator Sifuna had raised on who is to be celebrated. But it is good to know that without the farmers, they will not be able to have the end product. And of course, being the users of the end product, it's always very critical to celebrate these farmers and to always ensure that they continue expanding their agricultural sector. I'm one person who, from a business perspective, I do support the tea industry very much, and I know with what the government has also put ahead, matters fertilizer, the correct seedlings, the research centers, then we believe as we move forward, then farmers will be able to also have direct markets to their products. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Next on the clerk.
Order number 9, the Houses of Parliament Bicameral Relations Bill, National Assembly Bills number 44 of 2023. Second reading.
Yes, Senator Sigei, you have 19 minutes. You can utilize them if you are intended to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Tabitha is already complaining, and I'm indicating to her that I will do not more than 19, but could be less than 19 minutes. And Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to this very important and sad bill, particularly that has been brought before this House. And to start with, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the honorable members of this House to read the report that the Jailer Committee has tabled on this particular bill so that they understand the extent of what provisions the bill is seeking to. And while the majority leader, Mr. Speaker, was moving this bill, he did indicate to the House that over time there has been efforts made to ensure that the bicameral relations, that is the relationship between this House and the National Assembly, is harmonized so as to ensure that the legislative mandate of the two houses is in such a manner that it will be aimed at advancing the role of these two houses. Mr. Speaker, he went ahead to also confirm to the House that previously there have been efforts to indeed pass a legislation that would govern this particular relationship, and this is the Houses of Parliament bicameral relations, which is currently being debated. However, in the 12th Parliament, there was a bill that was passed by this House, determination of the nature of bills, procedure bill, Senate Bills number 30 of 2018, which this Honorable House debated and passed, but did not manage to be considered by the National Assembly. The reasons behind that inability to have it considered, Mr. Speaker, is what, in the view of our committee, is what informed the content of the present bill. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask, as I've said, the members to read the report, which the ultimate decision that the committee made is to reject this bill in its second reading. And the justifications, Mr. Speaker, are all running through from the provisions of the first clause to the provisions of almost the last clause, which in a short while I will explain and justify why the committee proposed that, or rather recommended that this bill be rejected in the second reading. Mr. Speaker, Article 94(1) of the Constitution of Kenya provides for the mandate of this House, and that particular mandate is exercised for and on behalf of the people who elected the membership to this House. That Article 94, read together with other provisions of the Constitution, provides for the bills that must come through this House, whether it is emanating from the National Assembly or whether it has started from this particular House and it goes down to the National Assembly. This particular bill, Mr. Speaker, has in its provision tampered with that particular mandate of the House, and in the process has largely affected or will largely affect the legislative process, which this House will definitely have failed pursuant to the provisions of Article 96 in its role of protecting the devolution and the relevant other additional mandates of the county governments. Mr. Speaker, in essence, what the committee has come up with is to analyze each and every provision of the bill and has given its mandate, has given its recommendation in whether or not such a particular provision supports the mandate of this House or not. In our report, which is running through, Mr. Speaker, 3 chapters, we have had to analyze each and every of the provisions which has been provided for in the bill and given our recommendations. Mr. Speaker, one of the very critical provisions which we must analyze, and the reason why we are saying we should reject this bill is the provisions of Clause 6(2) of the Constitution. That seeks to say that the question about interpretation of whether or not there is an issue that must be determined by the speakers is, according to this bill, after the bill has been read in the National Assembly. And when we read the provisions of the Constitution, Article 110(3), and Mr. Speaker, you will allow me to refer to this for purposes of stressing the extent of the attack on the mandate of this House by this particular bill. Mr. Speaker, Article 110(3) of the Constitution starts by the words, "Before either House considers a bill," the bold provision, "before either House," whether it is this particular House or the National Assembly. But the provisions under Clause 6(2) says that a bill can be considered by the National Assembly and a question only arises. That is, it says, whenever a bill is published in the Gazette, meaning the bill, first of all, will have already been published by the time such consideration is given. In accordance with Section 4 of this Act, a speaker may, subject to Section 7 and at any time before the period specified for the second reading. That is very critical, Mr. Speaker, because what the bill is saying is that you can consider a bill. It doesn't matter whether there is a question as to whether it affects counties or not. It can only become a question after the second reading. In this case, it only becomes something that the speaker can now be referred to have been seized over question. We are saying that particular interpretation under this provision of 6 subclause 2 is completely and fundamentally different from what the Constitution under Article 110.3 says. And on that basis alone, Mr. Speaker, we are saying this bill has taken away the mandate of this House without considering the fact that the bill in itself ought to have enhanced the relationship between the houses to ensure that the legislative mandates of the two houses and as per the Constitution is supported to be as broad and as inclusive as it should be. Another very peculiar provision, Mr. Speaker, is the clause that provides under clause 11. This is on conciliation in the event of a disagreement. Remember earlier on this House, you gave communication on formation of a mediation committee because of the disagreement that arose out of the Division of Revenue bill. This particular act is stating that where there is disagreement, it doesn't matter. This is actually, the wording of it is, where the speakers of the Houses of Parliament are unable to reach a joint resolution on a question after invoking the provisions of subsection 1, the originating House may proceed with the consideration of the bill notwithstanding the disagreement. That particular proposal is making nonsense of the mediation process because the House, or rather the Speaker, can decide to say, look, it doesn't matter the fact that we are supposed to go for mediation, we will proceed to consider the bill notwithstanding that existing disagreement. And that is one of the reasons why the committee felt that instead of curing the lacuna that is in law, the bill seeks to disregard the role of one of the houses, either this House or the other House. And Mr. Speaker, when we have such a provision being put in law, it plays completely contrary to the provisions of Article 96 that gives this House unvetted role and mandate to protect the houses. As it is framed, Mr. Speaker, the bill generally violates the provisions of the Constitution that derogates in terms of the judicial pronouncements. You recall that we have had cases all the way to the Supreme Court. Some of them are pending. And indeed, as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the cases have been suspended for the sake of facilitating negotiations in the two houses. And when this bill now is passed by the National Assembly, it is a direct indictment on the fact that the houses, the two houses, had desired to resolve the disputes which are before the court. In essence, Mr. Speaker, the position that has been taken by the National Assembly to pass this bill is a direct indictment on the pending cases, on the goodwill that this House had, and the goodwill that the leadership of this House had in considering an accommodation of negotiations prior to the cases being resolved by the court. One other very particular provision of this particular bill is the one that states that if one House has considered the comments and submissions by the public in the course of a public participation, another House is under no obligation to do public participation in the case of any particular legislative process that they are undertaking. And that, Mr. Speaker, is completely against the provisions of Article 118 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, this is the provisions of clause. This is the part 5 of the bill under clause 19, subclause 6, where it says, in considering a bill or a matter on which a committee of a House of Parliament has conducted public participation, a committee of the second House may A, elect not to undertake a similar exercise and rely on the findings of the committee of the first House. Mr. Speaker, the provisions of Article 118 of the Constitution gives it a mandatory term that before you consider any particular legislation, you must engage in public participation. By approving or passing this bill, we basically saying we are not going to be under an obligation to conduct public participation because the National Assembly could have or has already conducted public participation and have submitted a report. That, Mr. Speaker, is one aspect that we are saying the Constitution had provided for the public fully participating when it is dealing with matters to do with legislation and on aspects that the public are expected to participate. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, quite interesting, there is the provision that they have said we are supposed to participate in mediation or reconciliation or negotiating as the two houses in order to make sure that we arrive at a common ground when we are considering bills. But it has gone ahead under the miscellaneous provision, Mr. Speaker, to say that if by the report of the committee, let's say JLAC or any other committee, a recommendation is made to this House that judicial process is undertaken, members of that committee or an official of this House, whether from the Secretariat or otherwise, advises the House to go to court to protect the mandate of this House. Such a person commits an offense and they will be surcharged. Any cost that, for example, the Senate incurs in litigation will be charged upon that particular individual. Mr. Speaker, that is completely telling us that if we were to sit back as a House and decide that we must defend the mandate of the Senate in court, they will have committed an offense, and that offense, if it attracts a penalty, that penalty on our part will be met by the person who advised the House, whether it is a committee, whether it's a member elected, or whether it's a member of the Secretariat. Mr. Speaker, that is one such draconian provision, and it's something that I'm very sure it did not get into the consideration of the House. And if it did, indeed, then how low a House can go in giving such provisions in law, this is what the National Assembly gave us. This is under the provisions of Clause 20, Clause 26, 5 and 6, and in particular is 6, where it says that, this is very important, Mr. Speaker, and you will allow me to read so that the House and the members can understand the extent with which the mandate of this House was aimed at being curtailed. It says, the cost in respect of the wasteful expenditure. They have attempted to define what wasteful expenditure means under provisions of subclause 5. The cost in respect of the wasteful expenditure under subsection 5 shall, in accordance with a prescribed procedure, be recovered without delay from a public or a state officer, including a holder of a political office. In this case, whether they are members of this House, who are members of certain committees, or who are members of certain groupings that have decided to advise the House lawfully to take action in court, or who caused the House of Parliament not to comply with the requirement of this section. That, Mr. Speaker, is a provision that I do not think, even if we desired to say we are under an obligation to ensure that we enact laws and therefore we amend the provisions of this bill, that is one such provision the committee could not appreciate and understand why the membership of the National Assembly could include that provision in a bill and allows it to go through the process until it is passed and forwarded to this House for consideration. Mr. Speaker, as I had indicated earlier on, in principle, this bill seeks to fundamentally restrict the legislative and representative mandate of the Senate as provided for by Article 94, 96, 109, 110, 112, and 114 of the Constitution in almost 80% of its provision. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the bill violates the Constitution by derogating from provisions of the Constitution and judicial pronouncements on the procedure or for introduction and proceedings of legislation in the two houses. The case in point, Mr. Speaker, is the existing cases in the Court of Appeal and the High Court, where certain pronouncements have been made with regards to at what point does a bill, or rather at what point does a question arise as to whether a bill is a money bill or not a money bill. This particular bill is completely derogating against that particular pronouncement. And as I have already submitted, Part 118 or Clause 118 of the Constitution of Kenya that mandates public participation has been taken away. by the provision that if one house has considered this, the other house has got no obligation to do that. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, the provisions, as I've said, that restricts us to exercise the right as a house or as individual members to advise the house on certain actions that can require going before a court of law has been restricted. That in itself is equally constitutional. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, as a whole, however much we would have desired to support and amend this bill so that if it means going for mediation and enhance the bicameral relationship, this bill is fundamentally wrong, fundamentally unconstitutional, and unfair to the provisions of the Constitution and the mandate of this House. And therefore, I do not support the passage of this bill. I do not support the provisions of this bill. And I ask that this bill be rejected and it be taken to mediation so that the proper mandate of this House, the provisions of Article 96 and the provisions of Article 94 and 93 are protected. Let the bill be drafted as it had previously been requested by the joint session of the members of this House and the National Assembly, led by the respective speakers, and where the Office of the Attorney General was involved, so that a whole inclusive bill be drafted that contains the text that protects the mandate of this House and the mandate that this House has been given by the representation that is in the House. Mr. Speaker, I therefore reject and ask the membership of this House to read the report so that they internalize and understand the need of making sure that the only way that we will protect this House is by making sure that whatever legislation that is passed or debated and passed in this House are those that protect the mandate of the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you, Chair Jailak. Next is Senator Chalgay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I would have expected even Senator Sifuna to take note that I have worn an orange tie, and as the SGO of ODM, it should at least be fair today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't know, we need in our standing orders, when the chair and the committee rejects a bill, what becomes of it? But let me give my Solomonic injection to this conversation, Mr. Speaker, by saying, Mr. Speaker, I know today in the afternoon you had a communication where we are going for mediation under Division of Revenue. Mr. Speaker, what we are even requesting for counties is modest. It is only 415 billion, Mr. Speaker, against 4.2 trillion budget. While at least we accept that there are challenges with running of counties, including of wastage of resources and corruption, that should not be a reason why we need to deny counties the money, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this bicameral has come a long way from 2010 to now. I know, Mr. Speaker, I didn't see the need of this bill because the Constitution and legal precedents, even on petition number 3 of the Senate Republic in 2013 on Division of Revenue was pronounced itself as Supreme Court, that Senate must be part of budget-making process because it is there in the Constitution. From the word go, I didn't see the need why we should have this legislative proposal, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this legislative proposal has been made in a manner likely to make Senate become a rubber stamp of the lower house, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, Senate in its rightful place should and must be respected, Mr. Speaker. We are not an appendage of the National Assembly or any other entity, Mr. Speaker. We are elected by the people. We are entrenched in the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. And that is why the law, when a bill comes to the floor of the House, Mr. Speaker, the life of a bill as it is in the Constitution 2010, if it originates in the 8th House, if it is passed in the 8th House with amendments, Mr. Speaker, it goes for mediation. I don't see the reason why we introduce, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in that note, I want to celebrate my successor, Senator Hilary Sigei, that is now coming of age. Because if you remember my era, I used to shoot straight from the hip. And that is why by the third year, as the Senate jailer chairperson, I was de-whipped. Because if you look at my history, and the answered can bear witness, my prowess in running the JLAC in the last session, even Senator Manzo and yourself, even the JLAC at that time, and I know the chair of JLAC, Senator Cheptumo, was there, and we worked closely. I want to encourage him. Being a chair of JLAC is not easy sometimes, because even we went ahead and investigated enforced disappearance and extrajudicial killings, Mr. Speaker. So it is not, but I want to thank the Senate JLAC chairman and the committee for providing guidance. And this is leadership. This is now leadership. And we will take cue on the report of the committee and reject this bill in totality, in total. I don't know whether there is such a name in English. In total, we shall reject this bill, Mr. Speaker. Because I'm happy, at least with the secretariat that we have, Mr. Speaker. And allow me, Mr. Speaker, to celebrate, because these are our finest drafters and legislative drafters in this House. Dr. Johnson Okello, Director of Legal Services, Mr. Speaker, for being elected the President of the Multinational Association of Legislative Council, the first African jurist to sit. That body was formed 40 years ago, Mr. Speaker. But we have Dr. Johnson Okello, our Director of Legal Services, who holds PhD in law and has practiced law for our legal practice for over 2 decades, Mr. Speaker. I know where he comes from. Having education is not a problem. But we celebrate him, Mr. Speaker. For us who have interacted with Dr. Johnson Okello, Director of Legal Services of the Senate, he is a man of immense knowledge and wisdom and guidance at any given opportunity. So, Mr. Speaker, allow me to celebrate him, wish him well, as he serves for the next 2 years as the President of the Multinational Association of Legislative Council. Mr. Speaker, by merit, these are people who should be occupying the highest offices in the land if we are using meritocracy as a yardstick. But since we use other measurements, Mr. Speaker, like night running and other issues, then, Mr. Speaker, it's always a complicated story altogether, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to make 5 comments. And thank you also, Mr. Speaker, and your office for supporting our secretariat. We are saying, Mr. Speaker, our secretariat are the best. Dr. Johnson Okello has led, and I know a number of secretariat from our clerk, Mr. Nyekenya, and the deputies and the table office here, Mr. Speaker. We always celebrate and have tremendous respect, Mr. Speaker, to all our staff, from even the gatemen, from the people who serve us tea and food, all our staff, even the sergeant-at-arms are doing a tremendous. And I know these are some total, Mr. Speaker, of what you are doing in terms of leadership of the Senate and the Parliament of Kenya. But also, you should not also gag us when we have also reservations on some of the services in the House, Mr. Speaker. So, Speaker, when you look at clause number 7, and Mr. Speaker, how can you say, this is Article 118 on public participation. How can you say if one house has sold a public participation, the other house should not hold? It is a constitutional requirement that public participation by members of public must be done. Because that is what we get the second opinion, even on finance bill now, Mr. Speaker. Public participation is mandatory. Because you saw there were advisors that were being paid 1 billion. But the only advice they gave us was to add 10 shillings to a loaf of bread, Mr. Speaker, which is causing you and crime, Mr. Speaker. That is why we need to go back to the people so that they do public participation. It is in bad faith to say if National Assembly has all our public participation, we should not all our public participation. We have a symbiotic relationship. We are distinct. But we must do the job. If it is National Assembly, let Senate do public participation, let the National Assembly do public participation. I remember, Mr. Speaker, even on the sugar bill that is under mediation. When National Assembly did public participation, they didn't switch ram areas. What we should be proposing is that if a National Assembly has public participation in Makueni, then now Senate can do it in Siaya, for example, Or they do it in Nairobi, we do it in Nandi. We do it in Vihiga, Mr. Speaker, and I think or Bomet, or even Meru, so that we can complement each other, but it's not a competition, Mr. Speaker. So on this one, on the public participation, Mr. Speaker, this is the fall flat on its face and must fall by their own sword, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have seen in this bill, Mr. Speaker, on the joint sitting, why would you call us joint? You know the South Africa Parliament, Mr. Speaker, when they have a presidential address, SONA, South Africa National Address, they use joint sitting rules. Why are you calling us for a sitting rule, for a joint sitting, and let's say you use National Assembly, standing orders, and then you make you the speaker to be like deputy speaker of a National Assembly speaker? The Speaker, this bill has been drafted with an intention to demean and disparage and eradicate the standing of the Senate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is why as a Senate we can pride ourselves. So the first time we have said we want money for counties 415 billion, Mr. Speaker. And we stand by that. It will not change anytime soon. But the other day when they were handling issue of fertilizer, they could not even rise up to the occasion and put the wrongs into right, Mr. Speaker. Even in the process that under one care, I don't want to revisit, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know this issue of county government, it does not concern the issue of under section on the certificate of joint resolution. I think this is something we canvass in the Supreme Court in our matter, where we said we must have a concurrence signed by the second house, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on clause number 10, whenever the Speaker of the second house disagrees with the question raised and contemplated, the Speaker backs to the Speaker of the originating house, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my worry is on clause 10.3. If the originating Speaker causes the bill to be modified to accommodate the observations of the Speaker of the second house. So now we have removed legislation from members of Parliament to the two speakers. Because now that is dangerous. This can create draconian laws. Because if the speakers will modify the bill and give the House, they are also human beings. They can mislead the country and create even draconian laws, Mr. Speaker. Because if we allow you, Mr. Speaker, we know you are you are a person of Solomonic organized, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we always have tremendous respect to the Speaker. On the issue of clause number 12, the relevant departmental committee of the Assembly or member to be at liberty to adopt the bill and the bill be deemed to have originated the pursuant to the standing Article 1095 of the Constitution, office, money bill, and therefore it should not originate from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have lost many bills, even amendment. I made an amendment, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of the issues of diaspora. The National Assembly are telling me that it is not a function of the Senate. So I'm asking, a county like Busia is bordering Uganda. Does it mean it cannot be part of the international community or affected by international law? County like Mombasa is bordering other countries like Turkana, Kajiado. Does it mean it cannot be affected by the international law, Mr. Speaker? So, Mr. Speaker, on this one, clause number 12.3, we need to be careful because members will be struggling hard to develop bill, Mr. Speaker. You approve. When it goes, they send it and declare money bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, number 50 point, or shall appoint its members of the mediation. I think that is straightforward, Mr. Speaker, because in any case, like the way you did today, Mr. Speaker, like the way you did today, is just a procedure that the Constitution has provided. Clause number 16, I'll be very quick. A committee of one house with the written permission of the speakers of the Senate and National Assembly or other to deliberate on matters of mutual interest and concern. Mr. Speaker, my worry is on clause 16.4. The National Assembly and the Senate shall, upon commencement of this act, prescribe under their respective standing orders for the joint rules for the conduct of the sitting. Mr. Speaker, the houses may on motion prescribe rules, and then it goes, clause number 17. At any joint sitting of the houses, the standing orders of the National Assembly shall apply with such modification and variation as of the Speaker of National Assembly may consider necessary or appropriate. So we can have a joint sitting of State of the Nation address. But what this law tells us, that the standing orders shall apply, belong to National Assembly. This is dangerous. And it is a joint sitting. I have used an example of Parliament of South Africa. Whenever they have a joint sitting through SONA, they always join rules, Mr. Speaker. So what is the purpose of Clause 17? It is to demean us, to make us like MCS, Mr. Speaker, which we should not allow. I'm not saying MCS are lesser, but the standard of Senate is a bit high, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Clause 17.3, the Speakers of the Houses of Parliament shall enforce any directions given during a joint sitting in relation to the conduct of Member of Parliament in accordance with the application provision of the National Assembly standing orders. Mr. Speaker, you heard the other day, this is in the public record. When I questioned about the Bunge Towers, the Speaker of the lower house wanted to refer me to the Committee of Powers and Privileges. So if the joint sitting was a prime, Mr. Speaker, you as truly could have been crucified like Jesus Christ. Yet I'm doing the Lord's work or pointing out that does not work, Mr. Speaker. Like, for example, when we are using the VIP lift, you meet with tea, tissue papers, chapatis on your way, yet it has been written VIP lift, Mr. Speaker. So whenever we point out how would have been crucified, is Speaker Moses Wetangula, because I questioned and he said that I cannot access certificate of occupation because simply I am nobody. So, Speaker, I would be in problems, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, clause number 18, the Speakers of the Houses of Parliament may, in consultation with leaders of majority party and minority, arrange for a joint sitting for purposes of address, which is okay. It is in our standing orders. I don't know why it is here. Yet our standing orders said if we want anybody, including the President, to address this House, it is the prerogative of the minority side and majority side to agree. So why are we becoming prescriptive? Mr. Speaker, lastly, on public participation, clause number 19, I think I agree with the chair of JLAC. This is violation of Article 118 on public participation. I think we are considering public participation bill, Mr. Speaker. Failure to views during the is not invalid. Mr. Speaker, how can we say, Mr. Speaker, you remember Kiambu, the case of Kiambu CC, Mr. Speaker, and others were taken to court. In the finance bill of 2013, the Kiambu County Executive then did not do public participation. For the first time, a ruling was made. Mr. Speaker, can you call the Deputy Speaker out of order for distracting me while I'm submitting? Or for consulting loudly? Mr. Speaker,
what's your point of order, Senator Kaduri?
No, I forgive Senator Chalage. He's my junior, so proceed, Senator Chalage.
That's your point of order.
Deputy Speaker, you're out of order. Cherargei, proceed.
The Deputy Speaker, I'm giving him instant justice the way he does. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of, we need to be careful on this issue of public participation. I was using the case of Kiambu case in 2013, where they did public finance bill without public participation. The courts have made themselves clear. How can you say here, the Committee of Parliament shall consider the views from the participating, but you go ahead and say it is not an offense not to consider? It's self-defeating. There is a precedent that has been set in place, Mr. Speaker. So, Speaker, this bill, I agree with you and your committee that this bill does not hold any water, Mr. Speaker. We cannot be part. Mr. Speaker, in bicameral parliament like in the US, and I want to encourage my members of this House that in my constitutional amendment bill of 2024, I have tried and distinguished the role of bicameral. That Senate should be given the same powers as the Senate of the US, where impeachment is confirmed, appointments of the President, including cabinet, and many other decisions, Mr. Speaker. In fact, for example, why would the war emergency be declared by National Assembly? It should be by Parliament, because that's a serious issue that affects even counties, Mr. Speaker. On this bicameral issue, I agree with you and your committee that, in fact, in the second reading, we reject this bill in totality, let it go to mediation, But I don't see why we should prescribe something that is already in place, Mr. Speaker, going into the future, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say, I know, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of bicameral, I'm happy that some of the House leadership members are in US with the President. They should visit the Congress and the Senate and learn a few things of bicameral. Because especially the majority leader of National Assembly, because I heard him talking the other day on Division of Revenue, can he take a time off to learn how bicameral system operates, so that before you start fighting the other house, Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure Senator Sifuna, the reason some of us are invited to Mogotio for goat eating is because we are the real people who plan many things that run around in this country. Others are just, we travel to those countries, Senator Sifuna, and us, we have even interest in those countries, so you don't need to travel to see many things. It is better to go to Mogotio, and you should be happy that I always go to Mogotio because I save the public money, unlike when I'm traveling abroad. That's another issue is trying to bring, Mr. Speaker, that you should rule Senator Sifuna out of order. I have never used a private jet, unless other people have used, but I have never used, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you need to protect me. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, let us take the position you have taken. Mr. Speaker, let us take the position you have taken and reject this bill in totality. Thank you very much, and I support.
Senator Cherargei, thank you very much. Senator Manzo Kitonga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to look at this bill, and I think Dr. Oburu, Senator for Siaya, and the Senator for Meru understands the genesis of this bill. When we were in the National Assembly, immediately after 2013, there was this culture which developed of National Assembly bashing the Senate almost wherever time or opportunity arose. And similarly, the Senate will bash the National Assembly. So eventually, some ideas developed. That's why you see then this bill of dealing with bicameral relations was developed, but I don't think it initially came out in good faith. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution of Kenya is very clear, and one cannot seek to amend it or direct it through a bill of parliament. So this bill has come to the Senate in bad faith. And although once you reject it, there is a possibility of mediation, I don't think that mediation should lie at all. The moment we reject a bill at the Senate, that marks the death of that bill. Any efforts to revive it are also unconstitutional. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, the role of Senate is clear in the Constitution. And luckily for myself and the Senator for Meru, we never disrespected this House. And at all material times, all the years we were in the National Assembly. And we were also with Senator Kipsang, and eventually found ourselves here. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, if you compare the two houses, I just want to be kind enough. It feels much different to be in the Senate. It's a little bit apprehensive at the National Assembly, very unsure whether you'll have an opportunity to speak. And in fact, many people queue at 2:30 and it gets to 7 and they have not had an opportunity to speak. And that can run for months, Mr. Speaker. You know what that does to a member, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Manzo.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Karen, the leadership of the House the other day made a recommendation to the effect that we do not do what you're just doing when someone is on the floor. You are on phone. Kindly respect the House and allow Senator Manzo to be heard in silence. Proceed, Senator Manzo. Senator Karen,
thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill had its origins in the wrong footing. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the Parliament after 2017, there was a little bit of improvement of those frosty relationships. And in fact, it was Howard leadership which used to lead this bashing from the lower house to the upper house. And that will go unchecked. And it's like, up to the time the speakers agreed now to be comparing notes under Article 110 as to the status of the bill, whether it's a finance bill or not. And in fact, I want to agree with the Senator Fernandi. And that's why you see some of us are not very anxious to process bills, especially if you're in the opposition. You begin a law here, and as soon as it is passed here, when it gets to the National Assembly, it finds its gravesite. That happened to Senator Zani's bill on cooperatives. She really worked on it, but when it got to the National Assembly, it underwent a natural death in that now that she's no longer in Parliament, it is very difficult to revive it. But I've seen there's a new cooperatives law which has come to the House, and I think that is a blessing. I originated a bill from the National Assembly in relation to snake bites, because you see the people from Lower Eastern and the coastal regions go through a lot of snake bites, and a lot of people die. And the snakes have gone unchecked by KWS. Nor has even KWS provided the necessary first aid medications on snake bites. And that bill never, even got to the Senate. Time went out, despite a lot of pushing for 5 years. We have passed a lot of bills here. But I can assure you, as soon as they get to the National Assembly, they will never be processed, Mr. Speaker. It begins with that question. Is it a money bill? And almost every bill has a money element. And unfortunately, out of that biasness, then it's declared as a money bill and should have originated initially from the National Assembly. And the effort of a member from the Senate ends up being futility. And again also, Mr. Speaker, I had a lot of hope when ours truly, Senator Wetangula, became the Speaker of the National Assembly. I thought that would really increase because he understands this House and he understands the National House. The National Assembly, he's been in both houses. And I believe he's going to be very instrumental in bringing the right interpretations. And in fact, during his tenure, those attacks have reduced. And again also, with our Speaker now and the Deputy Speaker, the Speaker Kingi is a very experienced lawyer in this country, and also experienced administrator, having been in the National Assembly, having been a cabinet minister, and having now been a governor, and then he ends up in this House. So he too carries the experiences of the two houses, and that has given a lot of peace into a lot of things, especially when it comes to where the two speakers have to sit and agree on a way forward of a bill. But that notwithstanding, I don't know how this unfortunate bill has found itself getting voted at the National Assembly and getting forwarded here. I believe the two very experienced lawyers should have ruled it unconstitutional on the face of it. But again, I've seen this practice, Mr. Speaker, over the years, whereby speakers allow the houses to have their day. Instead of making the decision for us, they allow us to make the decision. And I think we are now at the right position to make a decision. And I believe the decision we will make in this House will not be contested elsewhere, not even the National Assembly. And only one issue I want to point out, and I don't know what Senator Sifuna thinks of this. When we were dealing with the Aussie bill, we raised an issue of public participation of this House and said, wherever public participation takes place in another House, when a bill comes to this House, then we should do public participation. And I expect when a bill comes from here and goes to the National Assembly, I expect public participation. from the National Assembly in accordance with Article 118. But there was a very unusual situation, and I guess that's why we are at the Constitutional Court on the issue to do with the Housing Bill, that now when it came here, we never really did public participation. Probably would have gotten more ideas and improved it, but that is in the past, Mr. Speaker. We left it to the courts now that it has already become law, and we actually have a hearing date to litigate on the same. Mr. Speaker, it is important when the law is followed on the face of it, and especially the Constitution. When the constitutional provisions are as clear as they are now in relation to the bicameral status, and when the Constitution itself has made it clear what's the role of each house, then there is no need to have a bill of parliament seeking to interpret the Constitution or seeking to amend the Constitution in one way or another. The spirit of the law of the Constitution must remain, so that, Mr. Speaker, we leave the Constitution, its spirit, and the letter of the law, Mr. Speaker, as it was enacted by the people. Mr. Speaker, the people of Kenya brought the 2010 Constitution. Anybody wanting to amend it, they know there are provisions which go back to the people through a referendum, and their constitution, their provisions the two houses can also amend. But I can assure you from my experience, there has been very many constitutional bills seeking to amend the Constitution, and they have never met the threshold required of 2/3, even from the National Assembly. They never made it here. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that should be the standard. Therefore, I want to support you and the Committee of Justice that this bill fails the constitutional test and should die here, get buried here in the Senate, and should never be resurrected at anyone's time. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oppose.
Senator Mutinda Maureen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allow me to begin by giving my disappointments for this type of bill in this time and era. As a country, we pride in being a bicameral parliament. Unlike other countries, like when you go to Uganda, it's only National Assembly. But we are privileged to have these two houses. And actually, let me further relay my disappointment, because if the Senate was not there and we only had the National Assembly, putting in mind the positions that we have as nominated senators are on this side of this house, then in one way or the other, this room will not be in place. Mr. Speaker, I've listened to your contribution earlier as the chair of JLAC, and I want to put and compliment the whole committee of JLAC on a very good job, well done, on how keen you've been able to look into this particular bill. Because in a nutshell, what this particular bill is trying to do, one, is trying to demean the powers of the Senate, ignoring where these powers come from, Mr. Speaker. Because these powers, Mr. Speaker, we did not just wake up and we found them. There was a process. There was a constitutional process that took place for us to be where we are. As colleagues have said very clearly, Article 95 and Article 96 of the Constitution has stipulated very clearly the roles of the two houses, the role of the National Assembly and the role of Senate. It has defined the exact role. Hence, each and every senator among the 67 knows their mandate, their role. So why then do we need to waste government and taxpayers' resources on trying further to try and do what has been done? Mr. Speaker, I've looked at this bill, especially Article 3, in terms of the objectives of this act. And from A to J, all the classes that have been mentioned here They are ranging from Article 1094, Article 110.3, Article 110.3, Article 107.2, Article 109.2 of the Constitution of Kenya, meaning and indicating that all these have been factored, all these have been considered. Mr. Speaker, looking at the issues that have been raised in this particular bill, it's a monotony that the National Assembly wants to acquire. Yet the Constitution is very clear. We are the upper house. I want to give an example with the county that I represent. That is the county of Nairobi. Our elected senator of Nairobi, has 17 constituencies. Now tell me how one person in the National Assembly, mostly the members, who only has one constituency, wants to come and demean a member who has over 17 constituencies. Case example in Nairobi, 85 wards to be more specific. That's trying to ignore what this house is doing. We are representatives of the county, and we have our mandate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yourself, myself, among other few senators, we sit in the House Business Committee. And it is sad because now I can tell the root cause of all these problems, because when we joined Senate and started serving this particular committee, we have court cases that are not only new court cases, but cases that have been there even before. And an indication that this is something that has existed for the longest. And it's the high time, actually, through the leadership of both houses, there should be closure as far as these issues are concerned, as far as these court cases are concerned, because there are court cases among, both houses. It's a high time we put a stop, because if we can be at this time discussing a bicameral bill at this particular time, then it's because we've given room for that. And I want to challenge the leadership of both houses to take the lead and ensure that some of these issues are sorted, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Article 118, as mentioned, it's very clear, and public participation is a very key role, and it's a constitutional role, because it says that Parliament shall conduct its business in an open manner. Its sittings and those of its committee shall be open to public. I'm happy with although it has not taken off, but with the current Bunge Towers, there is provision for, live airings of the committee proceedings for all committees, both National Assembly and Senate, for the public to be able to see and be able to understand the work that goes on as far as both Senate and National Assembly are concerned. So these provisions are already there. Public participation was not given according to what the committee has mentioned. And then, so if this process was not conducted, then even why are we having this bill at this particular point, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the way the bill has been set, talking about an individual who brings about an issue, either a committee or that particular member raises these issues, then they will be committing an offense. Mr. Speaker, those are what we call mere threats. Threats within the bill itself. Because with this kind of provisions that then threaten the members, I don't find them constitutional from where I sit, Mr. Speaker. And it is sad that we can have bills trying to give threat instead of offering long-term solutions from where we are. Mr. Speaker, we've seen that our budget as Senate is very low. It's actually the lowest budget in the whole parliament. And some of these costs, like the court cases, you know, the costs are bared by the Senate. And this is an unnecessary cost because you look at some of the issues, they are already in place within the Constitution, and if they are taken care of, we do not need to have legal costs that are still in place and need to be taken care of. Otherwise, those funds should be used in other ways and ensuring that we have maximum participation, maximum public participation as per Article 118 of the Constitution. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I beg to disagree completely with this particular bill. And if you would allow, because you know soon we are going on recess, that if today you could even close on this bill, we vote on it as early as tomorrow, and focus on the bills that will be able to help us move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Tabitha. Senator Edwin Sifuna.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. First of all, allow me to commend members of this committee. As you know, the committee is chaired by a former classmate of mine, Honorable Speaker. And it is such bold decisions that make me proud of being a member of this House, that we can look at legislation objectively and say we have issues with this proposed legislation and that we cannot support it. In fact, some of us have taken a position on previous legislation that has been sponsored to this House or originated from the National Assembly, that if a bill is unconstitutional, you should not even entertain the thought of subjecting it to a third reading where you then introduce amendments, because our position in the minority is that you cannot introduce any amendments to breathe life into an unconstitutional bill, and that an unconstitutional bill should be dealt with forthright from the beginning as an unconstitutional bill. So, Honorable Speaker, I see the members of this committee here are people that I would take their position very seriously. I see that Senator Catherine Muma is a member here, Senator Veronica Maina, and of course Andrew Omtata Okoiti, people whose advice on the constitutionality or otherwise of any piece of legislation I take very seriously. Honorable Speaker, there are 3 or 4 examples that I wanted to give, and I saw that the chair of the committee himself ran us through as a House some of those unconstitutional provisions, and this is what led to the conclusion by the committee that we as a House cannot abide by some of these proposals. But I want to challenge the committee that after we reject this bill, I think one of the problems we allow ourselves to get into, Honorable Speaker, is to allow such bills to originate from the National Assembly. How do they beat us to originating such legislation? In the historical relationship between these two houses, the Senate has always complained of being the one that is being sidelined, the one that is being undermined at every turn. Then if we are going to have legislation to repair that relationship, we as the wearer of the shoe, honestly, Honorable Chair, should be the ones originating the legislation that we believe will cure this particular problem. And I know that a bill originating from this House to cure this relationship would be far much purer, because we are motivated in this House by the desire to see these constitutional institutions working and nothing else. I would trust this House to prescribe the medicine to this problem than any other place. So, Honorable Chair, even as we argue for the rejection of this bill, even as we reject this bill, I would very much challenge the members of the JLAC committee to, with haste, put out our own version of a bill to guide the relationships between these two houses. It's unfortunate that the leader of majority is not in the House with us today. Honorable Cheruyot is somebody who has walked this journey of the relationship of these two houses, including the interpretation of Article 110, the matter that is before the Supreme Court, and what needs to be done. And he has cautioned us that during debate of this matter, we should not make it as if the entire National Assembly is in fact at odds with the Senate. And the best example, Honorable Speaker, was during the debate on the Division of Revenue Bill that was passed by this House, where it was clear that, in fact, it is only a small section of members of the National Assembly who think that everything should be perceived through the lenses of conflict between these two houses. But a vast majority of the members of the National Assembly, and you will see this demonstrated, Honorable Speaker, when we go to mediation over the Division of Revenue Bill, there are people who actually believe in devolution and making sure that these institutions of devolution, including the Senate, work. Honorable Speaker, as you yourself or the chair of the committee rightfully pointed out, if you look at a provision such as the one that you referred to, or the chair referred to, relating to when a dispute can be said to have arisen or when it needs to be dealt with in accordance to Article 110(3). Honorable Speaker, Section 6 of that bill wants to rewrite Article 110(3) of the Constitution, because the wording of Article 110(3), and I have my copy of the Constitution here, presupposes that any dispute will be dealt with prior to any of the bills being introduced in any or either of the houses. But what Section 6 of the bill proposes to do is to rewrite that to mean a bill can actually go before the House and undergo the first reading, but then to move the time frame at which point we can raise objection to that bill or declare a dispute under Article 110(3) to just before the second reading of the bill. Because, Mr. Speaker, the resolution of those questions needs to happen jointly and in the language of the Constitution under Article 110(3) before either House considers a bill. Now, I don't know what the National Assembly defines consideration as, or when consideration of a bill begins. But surely, Honorable Speaker, by the time you are introducing a bill at the first reading, that is consideration of the bill, and all matters must have been resolved before that is done. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, you yourself have made reference, and honorable colleagues who have spoken before me, to the provisions of Section 19(6) of the bill on the question of public participation. Again, Honorable Speaker, under Article 118 of the Constitution on public access and participation, there is a requirement, Honorable Speaker, that every single piece of legislation that is being considered by either House go through public participation. In fact, my argument, Honorable Speaker, is it doesn't matter where this bill originates. If a bill is introduced into this House from the National Assembly, my thinking is that as far as the Senate is concerned, as far as the Senate as a legislative body is concerned, that is the first time we are interacting with that bill, and therefore a key component of our consideration and passage of that bill is public participation, so that we as a House can never have an excuse to abdicate that responsibility and go through a bill or any proposal before this House without subjecting it to the constitutional requirement of public participation. When Senator Maanzo was speaking, he made reference to the housing bill that was introduced from the National Assembly as well. And Honorable Speaker, the Hansard will bear me witness that we in the minority...
Senator Sifuna, just hold. Senator Karen, the chair earlier on cautioned you against what you're doing. You're out of order. Proceed, Senator Sifuna.
Honorable Speaker, I was saying that if you look at the Hansard, we in the minority, during debate on the housing bill, were of the opinion that, in fact, because housing is a devolved function, because it is a legislative mandate of this House to deal with questions of housing, we needed to subject that bill to our own independent public participation to find out the views of Kenyans, Honorable Speaker. And the word of caution, of course, results from the fact that previously we have seen very shambolic so-called public participations before the National Assembly. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, one of our biggest shame as a nation was where public participation is conducted on a bill before the National Assembly, specifically the Finance Bill of 2023, 99% of the people appear before the committee, relevant committee, and oppose the provisions of that bill. And in the end, all of those proposals, all of those suggestions from ordinary Kenyans, from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, from civil society, from all those quarters are
sapa. Sasa wanataka kuturundisha kule miaka mingi ambaye tulitoka. Wakati wa kwenda mbinguni ni Mungu atakuja kutuchukua. Ya pili, kazi ya seneta. Tumeona wale wajumbe wa majimbo mandogo. Hata wiki jana nilisikia mjumbe mmoja akisema ati pesa ya MCA ikipitishwa hiyo moja, lakini nataka niwaambie kutoka leo majimbo 47 ile inaongozwa na senators na wale wengine ambaye wamekuwa appointed 20. Tuko masenata 67. Kazi yetu ni kuangalia vile magavana wanafanya kazi, na tumeona wanafanya kazi ile inafaa. Watu wafanyiwe kazi ya kutosha, kwa sababu kule vijijini ya hospitali mambo mingi inatakikana kule. Hata maji ya kulima anaingilia sisi na hatuna anja na pesa sao na tuwaingilie, na wale watu walivyo ndio ukatusi ukakuja, na ndio tunaona sisi tunafanya kazi inafaa. Na pia ule mwenye alitengeneza katiba ndio uliona alitunyima pesa hata ya project yoyote ndio tuweze kuangalia kazi kule vijijini. Bwana Spika, au wajumbe wamesoea vibaya sana, kwa sababu ukienda kaunti zingine unakuta hata wakati kuko na umati, either ni wa president ama ni wa governor ama ni umati wa aina gani, unakuta wale simiwa wakipatiwa masaa ya kuongea wanaongea masaa yote. Alafu ikifika wakati wa senator kuongea unakuta hata deputy wa governor unakuta hata akupatie heshima. Na ingeomba Kenya mzima kule tuweze kuona vile tutavusiriwe mambo ambaye vile senator anafaa awe ako kiwango gani. Kwa kulingana katiba, kutoka kwa MP tunaenda kwa women rep na tunaenda kwa governor, alafu na governor mwenyewe aweze kuita deputy wake. Kwa hivyo maseneta wanadharuriwa, lakini wanatudharau, lakini kazi tumefanya ya kutosha ya kuangalia governor anafanya kazi gani. Kwa hivyo ningeomba pia wakituingilia hivyo, ningeomba wakati mwingine si tupitishe sheria kama tunafanya tunaangalia pesa ya county inafanya kazi na namna gani. Hata sisi tutatengeneza katiba ile pesa ya CDF tuwe tukiangalia, kwa sababu anajipia kivua, kwa sababu hakuna mtu ako na uwezo wa kuangalia pesa ya CDF inafanya kazi namna gani. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, nasema ni aibu kubwa sana ya our MPs wanatudharau, lakini wanataka wajue sisi ni nyumba ya juu na sisi ni nyumba ya juu na our MPs ni nyumba ya chini. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, ningeomba turudi kwa constitution tena ndio tujue vile iko kutoka kwa MP kwenda kwa women rep na kwenda kwa senator alafu kwenda kwa governor. Kwa hivyo Bwana Spika, nataka nikuambie hata kuna watu waesi kuongea kwa hii Senate vile tumenyanyashwa na wa MPs na pia na deputy, na ndio unaona hata tumepitisha vile tutakuwa tunafanya, kwa sababu upande wa governor, upande wa senator na upande wa MP ni kama shule ya msingi na shule ya sekondari. Sijaona mtu ametoka shule ya msingi akienda ya sekondari tusikie huyo mtoto ametoka shule ya sekondari arudi shule ya chini. Kwa hivyo nataka kuambia MPs wale wako na chuki na wale wako na kiburi, sio sisi tuambia waende kiti ya MP, wakitaka kiti wangoje miaka 5 ikuje ndio waweze kusimama kiti ya senator. Kwa hivyo nataka kusema kutoka siku ya leo katika Kenya mzima MP wote 349 wanjue senator tuko senator 66 na county 47, na tuko na uwezo wa kuangalia pesa ya county government vile governors wanafanya kazi. Kwa hivyo nataka niambie MP, singeona ni vizuri ati unasema pesa ya governor inakuliwa, kwani wewe ni senator. Kwa hivyo Bwana Speaker, mimi naunga mkono, mimi napinga mara 100 mara 200 kwa hii kikaratasi, kwa hii mjadala, kwa sababu ni kitu iko na hivyo katika Kenya yetu. Na ninataka kusema hakuna mtu mkubwa kama senator, ni senator mkubwa kuliko MP. Alafu kutoka kwa senator ni kuwa kwa governor. Asante Bwana Speaker, napinga mara 100. Ni mimi senator wa Embu County, daktari ambaye ni deputy party leader in Kenya Kwanza. Asante Bwana Speaker.
Order, honorable members. Order, honorable members. Senator Osotsi Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I am even surprised why we are debating this bill, because this bill is a bill that is unconstitutional in almost every clause that I've gone through, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, secondly, in the tradition of bicameral parliament, bicameralism is managed through non-legislative. It's managed outside the law. Without specific legislation. It is the norms, it is the tradition, and is a standing order. So for one to decide to come up with a piece of legislation to manage the relationship between the two houses, I think in itself, it is a new standard that the owner of this bill is trying to come up with. Mr. Speaker, I know probably one of the reasons why the owner of this bill is trying to come up with this bill is because of the power struggles that the two houses have had in the past. Mr. Speaker, you remember the petition number 284 of 2019, which led to the High Court nullifying a record 23 pieces of legislation, including the Tax Laws Amendments Act, which the court declared them a nullity. And I think when you read through this bill, you see an attempt to try and patch up things so that we do not have an opportunity of going to court when we feel that there has been some form of discrimination or unfairness on the part of Senate. So this bill, basically, I look at it from that prism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are in bicameral parliament, but maybe we need to reflect as a house whether truly we are in a bicameral parliament or we are just something in between there. Because bicameralism has to have an upper house. If you look at other jurisdictions, UK, US, France, even here in Africa, a country like Nigeria in West Africa, bicameralism must have a house that is reasonable, a house that is small, a house that looks at issues with the expert scrutiny, a house that provides further democratic check on the lower house. That is bicameralism. But now, in this country, we basically have two houses. One house that pretends to be an upper house, which is supposed to be a lower house. I think we must have a relook at the way bicameralism is structured in this country. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity last year to visit the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where I visited the House of Representatives and I also visited the Senate. And when you visit the two houses in that country, even before someone tells you that this is a lower house and this is an upper house, you see for yourself. You see for yourself how the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is strong and effective. And you remember that is the house recently they rejected the presidential request to send the military to Niger and other countries which had problems. The House acts with some firmness. The House cannot be intimidated. I think the same should happen in Kenya. And I want to thank Senate. We have really tried. In the eyes of the public, we have come out as a more reasonable house, a house that stands with the people, a house that is effective. Unlike our colleagues on the other house, where I served for 5 years, which have become a disgrace to this society. Mr. Speaker, it was a shame the way the National Assembly managed the impeachment motion against Cabinet Secretary Linturi. And I think that should be a wake-up call to Kenyans, that we really need Senate to veto the decisions of National Assembly. Because at this rate, we are not going to have a parliament in this country. I was so disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that when the finance bill 2023 was passed by that house, the members of parliament, National Assembly were cheering like school children to pass a bill that was going to punish the people of Kenya. And then a few months later, an MP stands somewhere and says, we passed that bill without reading. That is a reason enough for that house to be vetted, to be vetoed by this Senate. And I think someone here, I think is Senator Sifuna, suggested that why can't the Senate also initiate bills to try and correct these wrongs in our parliamentary system, so that we get things to be done in the right manner. Mr. Speaker, in bicameralism, if you look at the history of bicameralism, the Senate, in our case, is a house of calm, is a house that has experts, is a house that takes time to scrutinize matters before they pass. And I think that if this person who came up with this bill really meant well for this country, he should have looked at other jurisdictions where we have bicameralism and understand that our problem is not how we relate with the National Assembly. Our problem is that lack of clarity as to which house is higher than the other. We say we are at the higher house because that is a global best practice. But legally, Mr. Speaker, I think we need to put it in our laws so that it's very clear that which house is bigger than the other. Mr. Speaker, if you read through this bill, you notice that the intention is basically to cripple the Senate and make Senate weak and weak and weak. I have gone through the provisions of this bill, Mr. Speaker, and if you look at clause 7, it is listing a number of laws and basically trying to say that this particular bill should be the powers of the other house. For example, Mr. Speaker, when under C, they say the annual county allocation of revenue bill, that it will be considered by both houses. But they go ahead and deny us the powers to participate in appropriations bill. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution is very clear that the houses of parliament should be involved in budget-making process. Why should we be denied an opportunity to participate in appropriations bill, a finance bill, because after all, Mr. Speaker, we passed two major instruments in the financial process. The budget policy statement, which this House passes, the medium-term debt management strategy. Why are we involved in passing these two important financial instruments when we cannot be involved in participating in appropriations bill, in finance bill, or any other bill that is a money bill? Mr. Speaker, this is a bigger question that we want answered. Mr. Speaker, this bill also tries to, under clause number 14, where it says, if one house passes an ordinary bill concerning county government and the second house rejects the bill, it shall be referred for mediation committee. Mr. Speaker, on one hand, they want to make sure that Senate does not handle some bills. On the other hand, they want to curtail the Senate so that if Senate passes any bill that concerns counties, then they can veto it and take it to the mediation committee. That is mischief, Mr. Speaker, which I have noted there. Mr. Speaker, also, when you say that this bill affects counties and the other bill does not affect counties, it doesn't make sense at all. Because we are in the same country, and there is no bill that you can say this bill does not affect counties or this bill affects counties. All bills are the same. They affect counties in one way or another because we are in the same country, Mr. Speaker. So one wanting to legislate to make a decision as to which bill affects counties and which bill does not affect counties should not apply here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also find section 17 of this bill very, very unconstitutional, because section 17(2) says that at any joint sitting of the House, the standing orders of the National Assembly shall apply. So what do we do with our standing orders in the Senate? They are basically invalidating the standing orders of the Senate, that the standing orders of Senate are inferior to the standing orders of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, it goes further to say that the speakers of the House of Parliament shall enforce any directions given during a joint sitting in relation to the conduct of a member of Parliament in accordance with the applicable provisions of the National Assembly standing orders. Mr. Speaker, what this implies is that it elevates the Speaker of the National Assembly to someone even above our own Speaker, that this Speaker of the National Assembly will have the powers to punish a member of the Senate on a matter that has come out before the joint committee. So this is unconstitutional, and Mr. Speaker, this should not see the light of the day. Mr. Speaker, public participation. In fact, now, this bill now goes beyond the main objective, which is managing bicameralism. It goes beyond that to introduce public participation, trying to put roadblocks on the public participation. Mr. Speaker, if you read section 19, section 19(3), where it says, a committee of a House of Parliament shall have broad measure of discretion in conducting public participation. What is that, Mr. Speaker? The courts have already ruled on this matter, Mr. Speaker, that public participation should not be cosmetic. Public participation should be done adequately. But this particular section is introducing this clause so that they can, those who like rushing bills through can be able to rush through bills without adequate public participation. And then it goes ahead and talks about hides behind duplication to deny the second house an opportunity to conduct adequate participation on a bill. Mr. Speaker, on the clause 19, 7 and 8, on the validity of the bills which are processed by these houses. Again, this section is unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, it says, a committee of parliament shall consider the views received from public participation broadly, meaning that the specific views received from the public will not be given adequate attention. And this law will facilitate that, Mr. Speaker. And 8 says, an act of parliament is not invalid on account of failure to incorporate any views submitted during public participation. You have seen, Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly. They go to the public, 90% of the views that are given by the public, they are never implemented in the final bill that is passed. One case is the finance bill, Mr. Speaker. Housing bill. All the things that the public said, they were never factored in the final bill that was passed by those houses. So basically, what this is trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is now introducing other provisions using bicameralism to make it easy for the other house to be passing bills without being questioned in court of law as to the adequacy of those bills in terms of public participation. Mr. Speaker, if you look at section 20 of the bill that says, before formally declaring the existence of a dispute between the houses of parliament, the House of Parliament shall in good faith make every reasonable effort and take all the necessary steps to amicably resolve the matter by initiating direct negotiations with each other or through an intermediary. Mr. Speaker, this is basically stopping either house from taking any other measures like going to court on a matter, so that we are not able to take our disputes to court when we are required to go to court, as it has been done in the past. So, Mr. Speaker, generally, bill is unconstitutional. This bill goes against the tenets of bicameralism that is not known globally, and this bill should not even be passed by this House at this stage, the second reading. This bill should be rejected in totality, and this bill is another attempt at killing devolution in this country. And we know that the House that has been persistently been used to kill devolution is the National Assembly. Everything they do, even the way they behave on the ground, Mr. Speaker, management of roads, rural roads in our counties, the National Assembly is an existential threat to devolution in this country. And we thought that now that we have a speaker who has been a senator, things will be different. Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that, in fact, under Speaker Wetangula, the National Assembly has become a very serious threat to devolution. I served in the National Assembly under the current Attorney General, who was against devolution, but not to the extent of the current Speaker. he has basically demonstrated that he cannot.
Senator Osotsi, your time is up. Thank you, Senator Osotsi. Senator Oroba Gloria.
Thank you, Speaker, for this opportunity to stand and weigh in on this bill. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this time also to maybe inform the public of what it takes to even have a bill get to first reading, Mr. Speaker. Because sometimes as legislators, when we are out there advocating and trying to sensitize the public on the work that we do here, Mr. Speaker, the public sometimes thinks that you're lying when you say that getting a bill to first reading literally can cost you an arm and a leg. Mr. Speaker, this bill, even as we discuss it, is a further hindrance or highlights the hindrances that we deal with to even legislate small amendments, one-line amendments, which can impact the public in terms of changing their lives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I pride myself in being an amateur politician, Mr. Speaker, because in that sense, I get to learn a lot of things, Mr. Speaker. I get to learn from those who carry themselves as veteran politicians. I get to learn from the electorate. I get to learn from the staff who are here. So I'm proud to say that actually I don't know much about standing orders. I don't know much about, I learn. Every day for me is a learning lesson, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you, with the 6 bills that I have tabled in the 21 or so months that we have been here, Mr. Speaker, I've learned a lot. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I've learned that in the Senate, you can have a bill that is clearly touching on devolution, that you are passionate about, you draft it, you work with the legal clerks here, they help you on all those things. You get to a place where you have a first draft, you go through the committee stage, you go through publishing, public participation, first reading, second reading. You even get to a point where your fellow senators might want to punish you because they don't like you, so they want to drop your bill. You get past that, Mr. Speaker, only to find out that even after all of that, even if that bill passes here, the National Assembly will squash it, Mr. Speaker. Just to give you statistics of how it looks like right now, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes when we speak, I like to use data. In this 13th Parliament, the Senate has had 94 bills that have been published. Out of those 94 bills that have been published, Mr. Speaker, you will find that those that actually went through concurrence are 22. The Senate bills that are undergoing concurrence right now are 22. And from those 22, you'll find that the Senate bills passed and referred to the National Assembly, but have not been concluded at just 18. So if you go through the statistics here, and you compare the bills that the Senate is passing, and the bills that the National Assembly is passing and bringing to our House for concurrence, Mr. Speaker, you will see that as a House, we are actually very friendly towards the National Assembly, just from the data that has been put out in terms of the number of bills that the Senate has concurred with the National Assembly and has gone ahead to pass, Mr. Speaker. But one of the things that we don't highlight enough, Mr. Speaker, is that there are bills that originate from the National Assembly that come to the Senate, and the Senate actually does not give concurrence because certain issues need to be discussed, they touch on devolution, and certain things have to be dealt with at the Senate. Mr. Speaker, but nevertheless, those bills are still passed in the National Assembly, concluded, and to anyone's shock out there, even without the Senate concurring and agreeing to those bills are passed, and the National Assembly quickly takes those bills to the President to assent into law, Mr. Speaker. An example of that is the Land Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 65 of 2023 of the Majority Leader. That bill, Mr. Speaker, actually did not get concurrence from the Senate. The Senate wanted to participate in certain issues, but Mr. Speaker, without our participation, without the upper house actually engaging in that bill was signed into law. Mr. Speaker, another example is that statute law miscellaneous amendment number 2, National Assembly Bill number 68, 2023, again by the Majority Leader, Mr. Speaker. That bill was assented into law without the participation and concurrence of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, the Senate being the upper house. Mr. Speaker, I find it very difficult to understand how then a proposed bill from the National Assembly by a National Assembly legislator can even be brought to this house to try and correct the wrongdoings that actually the National Assembly is participating in, Mr. Speaker. Because in this same data, there are no bills that have come from the Senate that have not sought concurrence in the National Assembly that have been assented to law, Mr. Speaker. The bad behavior is coming from the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, in the last parliament, 73 acts which had already been signed into law by the president were repealed, Mr. Speaker, because someone went to court and literally took the court through the process of a bill passing into law. And it meant that there should be concurrence from the upper house, from the Senate. 73 acts were repealed by the courts because they did not go through that procedure. They did not come to Senate, Mr. Speaker. The National Assembly was then asked to go and sit down with the Senate and regularize those 73 acts. Mr. Speaker, in their usual manner, the National Assembly, they did not want to come and sit with the upper house to regularize and follow the procedure to have those acts actually properly passed into law. Instead, they went back to court. They went to the Supreme Court, Mr. Speaker. When they went to the Supreme Court, they went to basically appeal and argue that these 73 acts should remain as law, Mr. Speaker, because they simply did not want to sit with the upper house. At that point, Mr. Speaker, because the president had already signed those 73 acts into law, it was an embarrassment to even the Republic of Kenya, showing how disorganized we are as a parliament. So, in an aim to actually save face, the Supreme Court again gave a timeline and said that the upper house and the lower house, the National Assembly, should sit down and fix what needs to be fixed. Mr. Speaker, to date, nothing has happened. So that should tell you, first of all, Mr. Speaker, that Senate, we are not the aggressors. We are not the people who are going out of our way to do the wrong things, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, as I stand today, I will give you an example of what happens, and I'm glad that I get this opportunity. Of my 6 bills, one of the bills that I have is the Whistleblower Protection Bill, Mr. Speaker, which I inherited from a previous senator who had been pushing this Whistleblower Protection Bill through the Jailer Committee. So the bill had been drafted, we fine-tuned it into what is currently happening in the country. Mr. Speaker, I proposed it. I went through a caucus as well that I sit in, the APNAC caucus, Mr. Speaker. I brought it here. The JLAC committee passed it and said, you know, this bill is proper. It should now go ahead into the procedure, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the summary of the bills that are apparently undergoing concurrence from the Senate to the National Assembly, that my bill, the Whistleblower Protection Bill, is apparently one of the bills that is awaiting for National Assembly to say, okay, this bill is proper, it's not a money bill, it is drafted in a way that is constitutional, so go ahead and move forward, Mr. Speaker. As I wait, if you look at this summary that I have, and this is a public document of all the legislative agenda for both houses, as I wait for my bill on the whistleblower protection to be approved on the concurrence from the National Assembly so that we can continue with it here, Mr. Speaker, I will draw your attention to a bill by Honorable Irene Kasalu, a member of Parliament from the National Assembly. She has a bill called the Whistleblower Protection Bill, National Assembly Bill number 56 of 2023, a copy-paste of my bill, Mr. Speaker. So, as I am waiting for the National Assembly to tell me that the bill that I inherited, which has in fact originated from the Senate, because I did not inherit it from the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. I inherited it from a former senator who had been working on it in the Senate where it originated from. Mr. Speaker, I tabled it, JLAC approved it because they were familiar with it. And Mr. Speaker, as I am waiting, Honorable Kasilu has already inherited the bill. And I can promise you, Mr. Speaker, because I know, and now, as much as I keep saying I'm an amateur, and I know other senators, pride themselves, they know the standing, they know everything. Me, I don't know much, but I know this much. My bill will not get concurrence from National Assembly. But Irene Kasalu will be allowed to proceed with the same bill, Mr. Speaker. You know, as much as we don't like shouting about the mess that we have internally, either within Senate or within National Assembly, you know, you get to a point, Mr. Speaker, the frustration of what you're dealing with. First of all, the basic logistics of running your business in Parliament, the new changes with the Bunge Towers, the fights become so many that by the time you are now actually fighting for a legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker, and you ask yourself, is it really worth it? Mr. Speaker, my sanitary towels bill that I tabled and even officially launched on International Menstrual Hygiene Day last year, May 27th, last year. I even launched it. The Cabinet Secretary and the PS for the legislative agenda acknowledged it. It was a public document that I launched that I've been waiting for it to be processed internally, Mr. Speaker. If you go through where that bill is, again, in the number of bills that are waiting to be approved, so to speak, seeking concurrence from the National Assembly, you will see that my bill of the free sanitary towels is one of them there. Since May last year, Mr. Speaker, I'm still waiting to be told that this bill is in fact a bill that affects counties, Mr. Speaker. That this bill is in fact a bill that is not just centralized as a money bill. I'm waiting for National Assembly, the same county women representatives who are crying and screaming and saying that they are not receiving sanitary towels, Mr. Speaker. Their house, the National Assembly, is the one that is actually slowing down a legislative proposal that is supposed to permanently cure period poverty. That is the irony of the things that we do here in Parliament, Mr. Speaker. I can go on and on about examples that are personal to me in terms of my bills. The Konza Technopolis bill, in terms of data protection bill, all my bills. In fact, at this point, I feel, if not for anything, I can come back here as a consultant on legislative agenda, because there is no office that I don't know in terms of pushing your agenda and pushing your legislative agenda, Mr. Speaker. I have knocked on doors, I have camped in corridors waiting for whoever I need to wait for to ensure that a draft is moved from one point to another. But it doesn't matter, because even if I do all of that within the Senate, once we are done at the Senate, Mr. Speaker, a National Assembly committee will sit and say, this bill does not affect counties, Mr. Speaker. Then my question comes, when a Senate bill is taken to the National Assembly and they thoroughly go through it with whichever internal process they have, and they come back and tell you, we are rejecting, we're not going to give you concurrence because this bill does not affect counties. The fundamental question then is, if that bill does not affect counties, when it is passed to law, should counties actually, take up the law? Because if from the legislative agenda they are saying, this bill does not affect counties, fine, then pass it. But then also don't expect that counties should be able to, take the law as any other law. So the issue of the bill does not affect counties, to me, is neither here nor there, Mr. Speaker. The issue of, is it a money bill or not a money bill, Mr. Speaker? Every single bill that originates from this House will touch on resources one way or another. There's no bill that you will come here to the Senate to amend that does not touch one way or another on money. So it's like a lazy kind of thinking where someone just wants to make sure they shoot down your bill. They say, oh, that's a money bill, Mr. Speaker. All bills touch on resources. All resources are tied to money. So maybe what we need to even first of all talk about before we even discuss a bill originating from the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and just excuse me for saying this, the fact that we have even prioritized the debate on this bill before my free sanitary towels bill, Mr. Speaker, as much as I'm calling out people in the National Assembly, can I also just call out our Senate Business Committee? We are prioritizing bills originating from the National Assembly, and our in-house bills in the Senate are sitting, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we are losing. We are losing the war. You could be winning this small battle, but we are losing the war. Can we even as a Senate, can we first understand that if National Assembly is waking up day and night to kill devolution and fight the upper house, why are we even prioritizing, debating what, for many members, we are senators. Those are the people who are running the businesses of this house. And I don't know how better way to say it, but I'll say, Mr. Speaker, before we start pointing fingers, let us clean up our own house, starting a lot of in-house problems that we need to deal with before we start debating a bill that has originated from National Assembly. In itself, it is a paradox. I want to oppose this bill, and I want to strongly suggest to the Senate Business Committee, you continue to insult us by prioritizing the bills from National Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mwenye Haji Mohamed Faki.
Asante Bwana Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii kuchangia mswada wa sheria ya nyumba za bunge. Mheshimiwa Spika, naona kiongozi wangu naibu wa kiongozi wangu ana ghadhabu kidogo, nataka nichukue dakika chache. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, kwanza kabisa ningependa kuipongeza kamati yako ya sheria na haki kwa mapendekezo yake kwamba bunge la Senate likatae mswada huu. Mheshimiwa Spika, najua kwamba katika kamati yako kuna maseneta wenye tajiriba kubwa, mawakili ambao wameweza kusoma na kushauri bunge hili kwamba mswada huu hauna wema kwa bunge la Senate. Mheshimiwa Spika, ningependa kuchangia mambo matatu ili nimpe nafasi Seneta Wambua kabla ya bunge kusimama aweze kuchangia mswada huu. Kwanza kabisa Mheshimiwa Spika, mswada huu ulichapishwa kinyume na kifungu cha 113 cha katiba yetu, kwamba haukupelekwa mswada huu kabla ya kuchapishwa, haukupelekwa kwa Speaker wa Senate ili kuidhinisha kama anakubali kuwa mswada hauathiri county. Mheshimiwa Spika, hii ni moja ya zile taratibu ambazo zinazingatiwa na katiba kuhusiana na miswada ambayo inapelekwa katika bunge zote. Mheshimiwa Spika, itakumbuka kwamba mwaka 2019 bunge hili la Senate lilikwenda mahakamani na mahakama ikabatilisha sheria karibu 25 ambazo zilikuwa zimepelekwa bunge la kitaifa na kupitishwa bila kuletwa katika bunge la Senate. Kwa Mheshimiwa Spika, mswada huu kwa vile unaathiri bunge la Senate na umejadiliwa, ulichapishwa, ukajadiliwa na kupitishwa katika bunge la kitaifa bila ya Speaker wa Senate kuudhinisha, Mheshimiwa Spika, hiyo ni kinyume na katiba. Kwa hivyo hilo kwanza ni jambo la kwanza ambalo lazima tukatae mswada huu. Mheshimiwa Spika, jambo la pili ni kuwa mswada huu unakiuka katiba. Na Mheshimiwa Spika, ziko hukumu za mahakama nyingi ambazo zinasema kwamba sheria ambayo itapitishwa na bunge bila ya kupelekwa ama bila ya kupitishwa kwa Speaker wa Senate, sheria hiyo imekuwa ni kinyume na sheria, kwa hivyo ni batili. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, hukumu zote hizo zinazingatia kwamba lazima ushauri upatikane kutoka kwa bunge la Senate kama mswada unaathiri county au la. Mheshimiwa Spika, jambo la tatu ni kwamba kuhusiana na swala la uhusishaji umma, yani public participation kwa Kiingereza. Mheshimiwa Spika, bunge la Senate wakati linaangalia miswada ambayo itakuwa imeletwa katika bunge hili kutoka kwa bunge la kitaifa, pendekezo katika sheria hii ni kwamba haifai kurejelea masuala ya uhusishaji umma. Mheshimiwa Spika, uhusishaji umma katika Senate unaangalia zaidi masuala ya ugatuzi. Tumeona kwamba kuna mambo mengi ambayo bunge la kitaifa huyaangalia, lakini sio masuala ambayo yanahusiana na ugatuzi. Mheshimiwa Spika, majuzi tuliangalia katika kamati ya delegated legislation, tuliangalia masuala ya kanuni za uhamiaji, yani refugee regulations. Mheshimiwa Spika, japokuwa sheria ile ilikuwa kanuni zile zimepitishwa na bunge la kitaifa na wakasema kwamba walikuwa wamefanya uhusishaji umma kwa upana, lakini walikuwa hawakuhusisha umma kwa masala ya kwamba zile gatuzi ambazo zimekuwa zikipokea wakimbizi, kwa mfano gatuzi ya Garissa, gatuzi la Turkana, gatuzi la Mombasa na Busia na kwingineko, hazikuhusishwa katika kuangalia mswada huu. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ikawa mawazo yaliyotoka pale yalikuwa ni kinyume na yale ambayo alikuwa ameyapata katika bunge la kitaifa. Mheshimiwa Spika, swala hilo pia la uhusishaji umma tulilijadili juzi pia katika kamati hiyo wakati tulipokuwa tunaangalia kanuni mpya za affordable housing. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, swala la uhusishaji umma ni swala la kikatiba, kwa hivyo haliwezi kuondolewa na sheria kama hii ambayo tunaizungumzia. Mheshimiwa Spika, mwisho ni kwamba mahakama ilisema kuwa sheria lazima iletwe au mswada wa sheria lazima upelekwe katika bunge la kitaifa, bunge la Senate kwa uamuzi wa spika kama sheria hiyo inaathiri county au la. Mheshimiwa Spika, iwapo sheria hii itapita, swala hili ambalo ni swala la kikatiba, Mheshimiwa Spika, litakuwa limeondolewa kwa mlango wa nyuma, kwa sababu sheria zote zile ambazo wangetaka kupitisha ambazo wameziorodhesha hapa katika kifungu cha kifungu cha 12 cha sheria hii, Mheshimiwa Spika, ina maana zote hizi zitakuwa hazina faida yoyote kwa Seneti. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, tunapinga sheria hii, na kwamba sheria hii Mheshimiwa Spika ilikuwa lazima kwanza mabunge yote mawili yatoe wawakilishi wakakae chini waangalie ni mambo gani ambayo wataweza kuyaweka kwa mswada huu ili mswada uwe unaweza kukubalika katika bunge zote mbili. Mheshimiwa Spika, hatuwezi kutunga sheria ya kusimamia bunge la Senate wakati maseneta hawajahusishwa na utungaji wa sheria ile. Mheshimiwa Spika, kuja hapa kujadili sheria hii wakati hatukuhusishwa, Mheshimiwa Spika, ni kinyume na maadili ambayo yanafaa kutumika wakati tunaangalia sheria kama hii. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, tunapinga mswada huu na kwamba ni lazima tukatae kama Senate, kwa sababu tukiupitisha itakuwa ni kujitia kitanzi wenyewe sisi kama maseneta. Asante Mheshimiwa Spika.
Asante sana Senator Faki. Senator Karen Nyamu.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is a blatant display of audacity by the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker. And as the bill reads, it seeks to restrict our representative and our legislative mandate as a Senate by going against provisions of Article 94, Article 96, Article 109, Article 111, Article 112 and 114 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. And this amounts to killing devolution. The proposal that one committee of one house electing not to conduct public participation on account of public participation conducted by another house, Mr. Speaker, is a direct contravention of Article 118 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the overemphasis of coordination between the two houses, of a consensus and clear guidelines of how we can coordinate, Mr. Speaker, directly interferes with autonomy of each house and the independence of each house, interfering with our representation of different interests and different constituency, you know, whatever we represent, we don't represent the same thing, the same houses, Mr. Speaker. And also that coordination that they have outlined very clearly how the two houses can coordinate will create bureaucracy, Mr. Speaker. Already we have a backlog of laws, so this will further delay the legislative role and the churning out of laws from both houses, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to call upon members of this House to reject this bill in totality and preserve the place of the Senate and devolution in this country, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Karen. Senator Wambua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Senator Karen and Senator Faki for yielding their time to enable me make a contribution to this bill. I'll also yield my time to Senator Tobiko to see if she can also make a contribution. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, let it go on record that I stand in complete opposition to the Houses of Parliament, the Bicameral Relations Bill 2023. For the following reasons, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to begin with, this is a bill conceived and drafted in utmost bad faith. In utmost bad faith, Mr. Speaker, because if indeed the drafters of this bill or the promoters of this bill wanted a smooth operation of the both houses of Parliament, then naturally the Senate should have been part and parcel of the thinking around this bill. To the extent that, the Speaker, a bill has landed to us from the National Assembly purporting to smoothen the operations between the two houses of Parliament, that to me speaks to utmost bad faith. Mr. Speaker, in the 13th Parliament, devolution has come under attack so intensely than at any other time in the history of devolved units in this country. I say we were here debating the division of revenue bill, and this country was the world to believe that the revenue allocation, the equitable share to counties in the 2023-2024 financial year was at 374 billion Kenya shillings, where we all know that we passed 385 billion Kenya shillings, making it the baseline for decision on how much to allocate in the 2024-2025 financial year. The Speaker, secondly, this bill is drafted in utmost bad faith because it purports to give a roadmap on how both houses of Parliament should operate. Mr. Speaker, I will take a minute to educate the drafters of this bill, the promoters of the bill, on the provisions of Chapter 8 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, Chapter 8 of the Constitution on legislature is very clear on the roles, the functions of Parliament, and the Senate is established by the same line, the same article in the Constitution that establishes the National Assembly. So the National Assembly cannot purport to lecture anyone, least of all the Senate, on how to conduct our business, on how both houses should conduct their businesses. Mr. Speaker, it is a matter in the public domain that there is some contestation on the interpretation of Article 110(3) of the Constitution. And I find it extremely pretentious of the National Assembly to purport to resolve that matter through a bill which is very partisan, to interpret then what 110 means for both houses of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to Senator Gloria Oroba make a presentation. And I want to say two things about the presentation made by Senator Gloria Oroba. One, I agree with Senator Gloria Oroba that perhaps it is time to reflect as a House, because we have endured blow after blow from the National Assembly, an attack every passing day. As a Speaker, every time a bill lands in the office of the Speaker of the Senate of the Republic of Kenya, I don't know whether it is by virtue of us being the true leaders in this country or a demonstration of our efficiency in conducting our business, but we are in so much hurry to process bills from the National Assembly, but for them, bills emanating from the Senate don't make sense. In fact, those bills are always an afterthought. Mr. Speaker, perhaps we should go by the Roman principle of an eye for an eye, so that if they want us to consider any bill, including this bill drafted in utmost bad faith, then they must demonstrate that they are also considering bills emanating from the Senate. In the absence of that, Mr. Speaker, we have members here who have drafted hundreds of bills. Let us deal with our bills. Let's keep piling our bills to them. And we don't consider bills that emanate from the National Assembly unless they consider our bills as well. Mr. Speaker, on the second matter raised by Senator Oroba, and you know, I was just going through this bill, and I was shocked, Mr. Speaker, that clause 12 of this bill, the National Assembly has already started implementing clause 12 even before we pass this bill that we are going to reject. How is it that, Mr. Speaker, a senator would think about a legislative idea, nurture that idea, go through the drafting stages, push it, lobby members to support the bill, push it through the stages of process in this House, that bill finds its way in the National Assembly, and just by the opinion of the Speaker or the opinion of a committee of the National Assembly, they decide that this bill is a money bill. And so for that reason, a member of the National Assembly can just adopt, adopt a bill, and now it becomes a bill of the National Assembly. How ridiculous can that be? That the work of senators is to think and to put in so much to develop bills and push them through all the stages, only for somebody in the National Assembly to adopt. Mr. Speaker, that should never be allowed. Because I want to give some time to Senator Tobiko, allow me to say these two last things. One, Mr. Speaker, as a leader in this House, I'll be having a conversation with my side, and I hope the leaders on the other side will also have a conversation with members on their side. On how going forward, we are going to be treating these things called joint sittings of Parliament. In those joint sittings, Mr. Speaker, we are going to insist that the speakers of both houses preside over those joint sittings. We are going to insist that each side of each House of Parliament will have their standing orders applying to their members. You cannot subject senators to the standing orders of the National Assembly in a joint sitting. That is the Speaker we are going to reject. The Speaker, on the last matter of public participation, we shall carry out public participation on every bill that comes into this House, whether it has originated from the National Assembly or wherever it has originated, Mr. Speaker, because that is the law, that is what is expected of us. Mr. Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time to Senator Tobiko, and with those many remarks, I oppose this bill.
Senator Paris Tobiko.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Senator Wambua, for being very, very gracious. Mr. Speaker, I arise to oppose this bill and to support the position of the Jailer Committee and the position that many, many, many members have already taken, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, initially, I was a bit reluctant to contribute, or to take a position on this bill, simply because I have had a chance of being a member of both houses, and I have a lot of respect for the National Assembly, and I do have attach premium value to the Senate, Mr. Speaker. And so when it comes to, a tug of war between the two houses of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, it puts me in a very awkward position, Mr. Speaker. But this being this said, Mr. Speaker, I would still say that this bill, as has been said, was done in bad faith, Mr. Speaker. And so we should reject in totality, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is sad when both houses are, clamoring for which house is supreme, which house takes precedence, which house will do this and which house will not, Mr. Speaker, because Kenyans do expect better of us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Kenyans expect us to, operate with a lot of maturity and decorum. Kenyans expect us to show leadership. Kenyans expect us to obey the rule of law and the Constitution to the letter, Mr. Speaker. And if we were all to go according to the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, then the roles of both houses are well defined, Mr. Speaker, and there will be no squabble, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, we have allowed ourselves as the Senate to be dragged into, these squabbles instead of us taking our prime time, Mr. Speaker, to discuss what matters most to the population of this country. Kenyans want legislators to make a difference, Mr. Speaker, by passing laws that will help them, by passing laws that will ease, their lives, Mr. Speaker. Kenyans are expecting us to be discussing the issues that affect them at the counties, Mr. Speaker. At the moment, Mr. Speaker, you know what the rains, the havoc the rains have done on our roads. Kenyans expect us to be giving a solution to, the infrastructural challenges in this country, the water issues, the health sector, Mr. Speaker, where our doctors have been, demonstrating throughout, Mr. Speaker. And so it is sad, Mr. Speaker, that now we get into a sibling rivalry with the National Assembly instead of us taking time to address what Kenyans really expect of us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thought the laws should really guide both houses, Mr. Speaker, on what should be done and what guides joint sittings, Mr. Speaker. And with utmost respect to both houses, Mr. Speaker, this is the route we should not take. Saying, Mr. Speaker, that, we get into a situation whereby we say, let us now an eye for an eye, Mr. Speaker. Let us revenge, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that is the route to go, Mr. Speaker. I believe this House can rise to the occasion to be the bigger brother, and Mr. Speaker, to be a well-endowed House with a lot of experience and brains, Mr. Speaker, for us to give a better direction in this country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Paris, and all members rise. Honorable Senators, it's now 6:30 p.m., time to adjourn the House. The Senate therefore stands adjourned until tomorrow, Wednesday, 22nd of May, 2024 at 9:30 a.m.